Hey everyone, welcome back to another story while we build in Minecraft. Today's story is the kind that will make your blood boil and then leave you absolutely cheering by the end. It's a wild ride, twists, secrets, messy fallout, and one of the most shocking personal betrayals I've ever heard. Before we jump in, I just want to thank everyone who's been commenting and supporting the channel lately. Seriously, it means a lot. Seeing all the engagement and encouragement has been amazing, and you all are a huge part of this channel's growth. So let me set the scene. Our storyteller thought his future with Sarah was solid. Shared plans, shared savings, the whole deal. But then one look at their joint account made his heart stop. Something was very wrong, and the explanation waiting for him was only the beginning of a much darker truth. So with that in mind, let's dive in and go back to the moment everything started to crumble. I thought I was building a future with Sarah until I discovered $47,000 missing from our joint account. 47,000. That's not a rounding error. That's not a few impulse purchases. That's someone systematically draining your life savings while you're busy planning a future together. I noticed it on a Tuesday. I was reviewing our finances because we'd been talking about putting a down payment on a house, and I wanted to see where we stood. The number on the screen didn't make sense. I refreshed the page 3 times thinking it was a glitch. It wasn't. Our account that should have had around $60,000 had barely 13 left. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I was going to be sick right there at my desk. When I got home that night, I tried to stay calm. I asked Sarah if she'd noticed anything weird with our account. She looked confused, asked what I meant. I showed her the balance. I'll never forget the look on her face. It was this perfectly calibrated mixture of shock and concern that I now know was completely rehearsed. She grabbed my laptop and started scrolling through transactions, her face getting paler with each swipe. Then she turned to me with tears already forming and said she could explain everything. The explanation was that she'd been making investments for our future. She had a friend who worked in private equity, real insider stuff, opportunities that regular people never get access to. She said she'd been moving money gradually so we could triple our down payment, maybe even buy a house outright. She made it sound so reasonable, so thoughtful. She'd been trying to surprise me. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her so badly. But something felt off. The numbers were too big. The secrecy was too complete. So I asked for details, account numbers, contact information for this friend, proof of the investments. That's when her whole demeanor shifted. The tears came harder. She started hyperventilating. Then she broke down and told me the real story. Or what I thought was the real story. Her mom had cancer. Stage 3. The family was financially devastated from treatments, and her mom didn't have insurance that covered everything. Sarah had been too ashamed to tell me, too proud to ask for help. She'd been quietly funneling money to her parents to keep them afloat. She sobbed into my shoulder saying she was so sorry. She knew she should have told me, but she couldn't bear to burden me with her family's problems when we were supposed to be building our own life. I held her while she cried. I told her it was okay. I told her we were a team and that her family's emergency was my emergency too. I meant every word. I was already mentally reorganizing our finances, figuring out how we'd recover, maybe even see if we could get on a payment plan with the hospital. I felt guilty for even questioning her in the first place. Then came the breaking point. 2 weeks later, I was at a birthday party for Sarah's nephew. Her sister Kelly pulled me aside, super excited, and asked if I'd seen Sarah's new car yet. I had no idea what she was talking about. Kelly's face fell immediately. She stammered something about maybe she got the timing wrong and practically ran away from me. But the damage was done. New car? Sarah drove a 10-year-old Honda. We talked about upgrading but decided to wait until after we bought a house. I spent that entire party smiling and making small talk while my brain was screaming. The second we got home, I asked Sarah about it. She laughed it off, said Kelly must have been confused, maybe talking about a rental she'd gotten when her car was in the shop last month. It was plausible enough that I might have let it go, except she wouldn't look me in the eye when she said it. That night, after she fell asleep, I went through her phone. I know that's a violation of privacy. I know that's not what healthy relationships look like. But $47,000 and a mysterious new car had eliminated my capacity for trusting blindly. What I found in her photos made my blood run cold. Pictures of Sarah behind the wheel of a brand new BMW, dated 3 months ago. Pictures of her at restaurants I'd never been to, wearing dresses I'd never seen. Pictures of her on a beach in Mexico from 2 months back when she told me she was on a work conference in Dallas. And then I found the pictures of him. Some guy I'd never seen before, his arm around her waist, kissing her cheek, the two of them toasting with champagne on what looked like a yacht. The metadata on the photos told me everything I needed to know. This had been going on for at least 8 months. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a forensic accountant. Cost me $1,500 I couldn't really afford at that point, but I needed to know the full scope of what I was dealing with. It took him a week to compile the report, and when I sat down to read it, I had to take breaks every few pages because I kept wanting to put my fist through a wall. Sarah had been systematically transferring money from our joint account into a secondary account I didn't know existed. From there, she'd been funding an entire double life. The accountant tracked purchases at high-end boutiques, luxury hotels, airline tickets, rental cars. He found payments to a parking garage downtown, where she apparently kept the BMW so I wouldn't see it. There were restaurant charges that sometimes hit on the same night she told me she was working late. The family emergency was completely fabricated. He even called the hospital she'd named. Her mom had never been a patient there. What hit me hardest was seeing it all laid out in black and white. Every lie, every manipulation, every time she'd looked me in the eye and told me she loved me while she was draining our future to fund her affair. The accountant estimated she'd spent around $43,000 of the missing money. The rest she'd probably moved to another account he couldn't track without a subpoena. You almost have to admire the audacity of keeping up that level of deception for 8 months straight. I spent 3 days gathering everything I needed. Bank statements, screenshots from her phone that I'd backed up, the forensic accountant's report, text messages between her and this guy where she called me her safety net and joked about how clueless I was. I printed everything, organized it into folders, and then I made a decision that some people might think was petty. I think it was justice. Sarah had been talking about wanting to have an engagement party before we officially got engaged, something low-key with just our families. I'd been dragging my feet on it because I was focused on saving for a ring, but now I suddenly became very enthusiastic about the idea. I told her I wanted to do it right, invite both families, make it special. She was thrilled. She started planning immediately, picking out decorations, planning a menu, getting her hair done. The whole time I watched her prepare for this party, knowing what was coming, it took everything in me to keep my face neutral. The night of the party, both families showed up. About 30 people total in the backyard of the small event space I'd rented. Sarah looked beautiful. She'd bought a new dress for the occasion. Probably with my money, I realized, and almost laughed at the absurdity. Everyone was mingling, drinking wine, waiting for me to make the big announcement. I did make an announcement, just not the one they expected. I stood up, clinked my glass, and thanked everyone for coming. I said I'd brought everyone together because there was something important I needed to share about my relationship with Sarah. She was beaming. Her mom had tears in her eyes already. Then I turned on the projector I'd set up. The first slide was our joint bank account balance from 8 months ago, $62,000. The second slide was our current balance, $13,000. I heard someone gasp. Sarah's smile was frozen on her face. The third slide was a photo of her new BMW. The fourth was her and her boyfriend on that yacht. The fifth was a summary from the forensic accountant showing the pattern of transfers. And here's where it gets absurd. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you are watching from in the comments below. Seriously, I need to know if people actually do this stuff where you live. Alright, back to the fallout from the most awkward engagement party in history. The room was dead silent except for the click of the projector advancing through slides. I showed them everything. Every receipt from expensive dinners. Screenshots of her texts calling me her backup plan. Photos of her living this secret luxury lifestyle while telling me we needed to budget carefully for our future. Her parents looked like they'd been hit by a truck. Her sister had her hand over her mouth. My parents were staring at Sarah with expressions of pure disgust. Sarah tried to run. She literally got up and tried to leave, but her dad blocked the door. He asked her if any of this was true. She started crying, stammering that I'd taken things out of context, that I was embarrassing her. Her mum asked about the cancer story. Sarah went pale. She couldn't even come up with a lie fast enough. Her mom just started crying. I finished the presentation by explaining that I'd be pressing charges for theft and fraud, that I'd already consulted with a lawyer, and that I had every intention of pursuing full restitution. Then I thanked everyone for coming, said there was food and drinks they were welcome to stay and enjoy, and I left. I walked out of that party, got in my car, and drove to my parents' house where I'd been secretly staying for the past 3 days. The aftermath was even better than I'd hoped. Sarah's affair partner ghosted her within 24 hours of finding out the money she'd been spending wasn't actually hers. Turns out he was only interested in the luxury lifestyle, not the actual person. Sarah tried calling me probably 200 times over the next week. I didn't answer. My lawyer handled all communication. Her parents were mortified. Her dad actually called me to apologize, said he'd had no idea and that they'd raised her better than this. They offered to help with restitution even though they weren't legally obligated. I told them I appreciated it, but that Sarah was an adult and needed to face the consequences of her choices alone. The legal process took months, but in the end, Sarah pleaded guilty to theft. The judge ordered her to pay back the full $47,000 plus interest and legal fees. With her salary, that's going to take roughly a decade. She also had to sell the BMW. Last I heard, she moved back in with her parents because she couldn't afford rent and restitution payments. I recovered most of my money eventually, though the legal fees ate into it. I also got therapy, which honestly helped more than I expected. Turns out having someone you love systematically betray you for 8 months straight does some psychological damage. But I'm doing better now. I'm dating someone new, someone who actually believes in transparency and shared finances, meaning shared decisions. Looking back, the wildest part isn't even the money or the affair. It's the sheer calculation it took to maintain that level of deception. Every time she kissed me goodbye in the morning, she knew she was going to spend my money on another man. Every time we talked about our future, she knew she was actively destroying it. That takes a special kind of person. But Sarah's financial betrayal was nothing compared to what my buddy discovered when his fiancée promised to invest their wedding fund. Jessica convinced me to let her invest our $35,000 wedding fund in her cousin's revolutionary app startup. $35,000. That was 2 years of saving, of skipping vacations and eating ramen more nights than I care to admit. That money represented every compromise we'd made, every extra shift I'd picked up, every bonus I'd banked instead of spent. And she wanted to put it all into some tech startup I'd never heard of. At first, I said absolutely not. We'd had this conversation before about keeping the wedding fund untouchable. It was sacred money, earmarked for one thing and one thing only. But Jessica was persistent. She sat me down one evening with her laptop and showed me the most professional presentation I'd ever seen. Sleek graphics, market analysis, projected growth charts that curved upward like a hockey stick. Her cousin Marcus was apparently some kind of tech genius who'd developed an app that was going to revolutionize the gig economy. I'm still not entirely sure what that meant, but the presentation made it sound inevitable. She showed me testimonials from supposed early investors, people I'd never heard of, but they had titles like Managing Director and Chief Investment Officer next to their names. They talked about Marcus's vision, his track record, the ground floor opportunity. Jessica explained that Marcus was only letting family in on this round of investment before taking it to venture capitalists. We could triple our money in 6 months, maybe quadruple it in a year. We could have the wedding of our dreams and still have money left over for a down payment on a house. I was skeptical. I've never been the type to believe in get-rich-quick schemes, and this felt dangerously close to that territory. But Jessica had an answer for every concern. Why hadn't I heard of Marcus's previous successes? He preferred to work behind the scenes. Why wasn't this on any tech news sites yet? They were in stealth mode to avoid copycats. Why did we need to invest right now? The round was closing in 2 weeks, and then the opportunity would be gone forever. The thing that finally broke down my resistance was trust. Jessica and I had been together for 4 years. We talked about spending our lives together. If I couldn't trust her judgment on something this important, what did that say about our relationship? So I agreed. We moved the money from our wedding savings account into an investment account Jessica set up. She handled all the paperwork because, she said, Marcus preferred to work with one point of contact per investor. I signed where she told me to sign. The first month, everything seemed fine. Jessica would give me updates about development milestones, about beta testing going well, about interest from major tech companies. She showed me emails from Marcus with subject lines like exceeded Q1 targets and VC firm circling. I didn't read them carefully. I trusted her. The second month, I started asking when we'd see returns. Jessica said these things took time, that we needed to be patient. The app was almost ready to launch, just a few more weeks of fine-tuning. I accepted that. I didn't know anything about app development timelines. The third month, I asked the same question. Same answer. Almost ready. Just a few more tweaks. By month 4, almost ready had become our household catchphrase. I'd joke about it. When's dinner ready? Almost ready, just like Marcus's app. Jessica stopped finding it funny. She got defensive when I brought it up, said I was being negative, that I needed to trust the process. I backed off because I didn't want to fight, but a small voice in my head was starting to whisper that something wasn't right. Then came the breaking point. I asked if I could meet Marcus. Just a casual coffee, nothing formal. I wanted to hear about the app firsthand, maybe see a demo. Jessica's reaction was extreme. She got angry in a way I'd never seen before, said I was being controlling, that I didn't trust her, that Marcus was busy and didn't have time to hold investors' hands through every little doubt. We had a massive fight. She accused me of sabotaging our future. I accused her of being secretive. We didn't talk for 2 days. On the third day, I came home early from work. Jessica's laptop was open on the kitchen table. She was in the shower. I wasn't trying to snoop, but the screen was facing me and I could see a folder labeled Wedding Fund _project sitting right there on her desktop. My stomach dropped. Something about that folder name felt wrong. Why would our investment need a project folder on her personal laptop? I knew I shouldn't look. I knew it was a violation of privacy. I also knew that $35,000 of my money was involved and that Jessica had just spent 2 days not speaking to me rather than let me meet the person we'd invested with. So I looked. The folder was full of templates, professional-looking documents with placeholder text, company letterhead designs, fake email exchanges that she'd clearly written herself, both sides of the conversation. There were bank statements showing wire transfers that didn't match our actual account activity. There were investor testimonials with stock photos attached to made-up names. Everything I'd seen in that original presentation, it was all there in various stages of creation. She'd built the entire thing herself. I felt like I was going to throw up. I opened more files, found spreadsheets tracking her actual spending. Our $35,000 hadn't gone to any cousin or any app. It had gone to online gambling sites, thousands of dollars at a time, dozens of transactions. There were also rent receipts for an apartment across town that I'd never heard of. More gambling losses, cash withdrawals. It was all documented right there in her own obsessive spreadsheet, like she'd been keeping score of her own fraud. But that wasn't even the worst part. There were emails to herself with reminders about what lies she'd told me and when. Told him beta testing started March 10th. Make sure timeline matches. Said Marcus graduated MIT. Don't forget. She'd been keeping a reference guide for her own deception so she wouldn't contradict herself. The level of premeditation was staggering. I heard the shower turn off. I closed the laptop and sat there at the kitchen table, my hands shaking. Jessica came out in her bathrobe, saw me sitting there, and immediately knew something was wrong. She asked what happened. I just pointed at her laptop and said, Wedding Fund _project. Her face went white. She tried to grab the laptop, but I was faster. I opened it back up and started clicking through files while she stood there frozen. She didn't deny it. She couldn't. The evidence was right there. Instead, she just started crying and saying she could explain. The explanation was somehow worse than I'd imagined. She'd developed a gambling problem 2 years ago, right around when we got engaged. Started small with online poker, then sports betting, then anything she could access from her phone. She'd drained her own savings in the first 6 months. Then she'd started borrowing from friends, telling them she had temporary cash flow problems. When they started asking for repayment, she'd gotten desperate. She'd taken out credit cards in her name and maxed them out. The apartment I'd found receipts for, that was where she went when she told me she was working late. She'd rented it as a place to gamble in private where I wouldn't see her. When we started saving for the wedding, she'd seen it as a solution. If she could just access that money, she could pay everyone back and quit. But of course, she didn't quit. She gambled it all away chasing losses, trying to win back what she'd already lost. The fake investment scheme was her way of buying time, of explaining where the money went, while she figured out how to replace it. She'd actually convinced herself she could win it all back before I noticed it was gone. I just stared at her while she talked. This person I'd planned to marry, who I'd trusted with everything, had spent 2 years lying to my face every single day. She'd fabricated an entire fictional company, complete with a fictional cousin, rather than tell me the truth. She'd taken our future and fed it into slot machines and poker apps. When she finally stopped talking, I asked one question. Is there any of it left? She shook her head. All 35,000 was gone. Plus, she was in debt to several people I'd never met, owed money on credit cards I didn't know existed, and was 3 months behind on rent for her secret apartment. I called off the wedding that night, told her I needed her out of our apartment by the end of the week. She begged me to reconsider, said she'd get help, said she'd pay me back every penny. I told her I was reporting the fraud to the police and that she should get a lawyer. She looked at me like I'd slapped her, said I was going to ruin her life. I almost laughed. She'd ruined her own life. I was just making sure there were consequences. I called her parents the next day and told them everything. They were devastated. Her mum cried. Her dad asked if I was sure, if maybe there was a misunderstanding. I sent them screenshots from her laptop. They stopped asking questions. Her dad said they'd help her get treatment, but that they agreed she needed to face legal consequences. The legal process was messy. Jessica pleaded guilty to fraud and theft to avoid jail time. She got probation, mandatory gambling addiction treatment, and a court order to pay restitution. The amount she owes me, plus fees and interest, comes to about $48,000 now. With her salary, that's going to take years. She had to sell everything of value she owned. She's working 3 jobs, I heard, trying to stay on top of the payments and avoid having her probation revoked. She's also banned from every casino in the state, and most online gambling platforms flagged her accounts. Her family barely speaks to her. Most of our mutual friends sided with me when they heard what happened. Her entire life imploded. And the crazy thing is, she did it all to herself. Every lie, every fabricated email, every dollar gambled away. That was all her choice. I eventually recovered about half the money through restitution payments and selling off things that were technically joint property. I had to completely restart my wedding fund from scratch. I'm engaged again now to someone completely different, someone who thinks joint finances mean actual transparency. We keep separate savings accounts and a shared household account. Trust, but verify. Lesson learned. The thing that still gets me is the effort she put into the lie. Creating fake companies, writing emails to herself, maintaining a spreadsheet of her deception. She could have put that energy into literally anything else and probably succeeded. Instead, she built an elaborate house of cards and then seemed shocked when it collapsed. Speaking of family betrayals that cut deep, let me tell you about the time someone's sister decided that shared family money meant something very different. My parents trusted my sister Emily with access to their retirement account because she was studying finance. That sentence alone should have been a red flag, but hindsight is perfect like that. Emily was the golden child, the one who always had her life together, the one who made responsible decisions while I was still figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. So when she offered to help manage their investments during her junior year at business school, Mom and Dad were thrilled. They saw it as free financial advice from someone they trusted completely. I didn't think much of it at first. Emily would come over for Sunday dinners and talk about portfolio diversification and market trends. Dad would nod along like he understood half of what she was saying. Mum would just smile proudly. Their retirement account was their safety net, about $200,000 they'd saved over 30 years of work. The plan was to let it grow for another decade before Dad retired from the factory and Mom left her nursing job. 2 years went by. Emily graduated, got a job at some financial firm downtown, and kept managing their account. Everything seemed fine until I came home for Christmas, and Dad mentioned that their retirement fund had taken a beating. He said the market had been rough, that Emily explained it was normal volatility, that these things happened. He seemed worried but resigned to it. I asked how much they'd lost. He said their account was down to about 80,000. That's when my stomach dropped. The market hadn't been rough. If anything, The past 2 years had seen pretty consistent growth. I work in tech, not finance, but I know how to Google stock market performance. Something wasn't adding up. I offered to help Dad with his taxes that year, something I'd never done before. He seemed grateful for the help. Going through their financial documents was like watching a slow-motion car crash. The retirement account statements showed consistent withdrawals over 24 months. Not huge amounts that would trigger immediate alarm, but enough that it added up. 5,000 here, 8,000 there, sometimes 10,000 in a single month. Each withdrawal had a note in the memo line. Things like rebalancing portfolio or strategic reallocation or tax optimization transfer. Financial jargon that sounded legitimate enough that my parents wouldn't question it. But here's the thing about those transfers. They weren't going into other investment accounts. They were going into personal checking and savings accounts, plural. I found at least 4 different account numbers that had received money from my parents' retirement fund. None of them belonged to my parents. I didn't confront Emily immediately. I needed to be sure. I spent 3 weeks quietly investigating, tracking down account information, following the money trail. It led me to an address across town in one of those new luxury apartment complexes that cost more per month than most people's mortgages. I drove there one Saturday afternoon and just watched. Sure enough, Emily's car was in the parking garage. I waited for hours. Finally, she came out. But she wasn't alone. She was with people I'd never seen before, dressed in clothes that definitely weren't from her usual wardrobe. Designer everything. They were laughing, heading to brunch somewhere. I followed them to this upscale restaurant and sat a few tables away. That's when I heard them call her Veronica. Veronica, not Emily. These people had no idea who she really was. Over the next month, I pieced together her entire double life. The apartment was filled with furniture that probably cost more than my car. She'd created social media accounts under the name Veronica Chase, where she presented herself as a successful entrepreneur who'd sold a startup and was now living off the proceeds. Her friend group in this fake life were all wealthy, connected people who actually believed she was one of them. She went to charity galas, she took luxury vacations, she posted photos from exclusive restaurants and private events, and she was funding all of it with our parents' retirement money. This is where patience finally snapped. I documented everything. Photos of the apartment, screenshots of the Veronica social media accounts, bank statements showing the transfers. I even managed to record some conversations at that restaurant using my phone, where Emily or Veronica or whoever she was that day bragged about her lifestyle. In one particularly damning recording, she told her friends that her family was pleasantly clueless and that managing their money was easier than taking candy from a baby. I waited until Thanksgiving. The whole family was there. Aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents. Emily showed up late, apologizing about work, wearing an outfit that probably cost $3,000. Everyone fawned over her, asked about her job, complimented her success. She soaked it all in, playing the part of the accomplished daughter perfectly. After dinner, I asked if I could make an announcement. Said I had something important to share with the family. Emily looked at me curiously, probably thinking I was going to announce an engagement or a new job or something normal. Instead, I pulled out my laptop and connected it to the TV. The first slide was my parents' retirement account balance from 2 years ago, $198,000. The second slide was the current balance, $76,000. I heard Mom gasp. Dad's face went pale. Emily's smile disappeared instantly. I walked them through everything, every transfer, every fake memo line, every account the money had gone to. Then I showed them photos of the apartment, photos of Emily living as Veronica, screenshots of her social media showing a lifestyle that didn't match her supposed salary. The room was dead silent except for my voice explaining how our sister had stolen $120,000 from our parents' future. Emily stood up and started denying everything, said I was lying, that I'd fabricated the evidence, that I was jealous of her success. She put on a good show, I'll give her that. Tears, indignation, the whole performance. Our mom actually started to defend her, said there must be some explanation. That's when I played the recordings. Her voice came through the TV speakers crystal clear, calling our parents clueless, bragging about manipulating them, laughing about how easy it was to steal from people who trusted you. The room erupted. Dad started yelling. Mum was crying. Emily tried to leave, but our uncle blocked the door. She finally broke down and admitted everything, but by then it was too late for damage control. The person I couldn't stop staring at was our grandmother. She just sat there shaking her head, looking at Emily like she was a stranger. And in a way, she was. We'd all thought we knew Emily, but Veronica was the real person. Emily was just the mask she wore around family. Things went from bad to unhinged after that. Mom and Dad pressed charges: felony theft, fraud, elder financial abuse. Emily tried to claim it was a misunderstanding, that she'd meant to pay it back, that she'd made some bad investment decisions. But the evidence was overwhelming. The prosecution had bank records, recordings, photos of her double life. There was no way to spin this as anything other than what it was: deliberate, calculated theft from her own parents. Her fake life collapsed almost immediately. The wealthy boyfriend she'd been dating, some tech executive who actually had money, found out she was broke and facing felony charges. He dumped her via text. Her Veronica friend group vanished the second the scandal hit social media. Turns out wealthy people don't like associating with frauds and thieves. The luxury apartment was rented, and she got evicted when she couldn't make payments. All that designer furniture got repossessed or sold to pay legal fees. The trial took 8 months. Emily pleaded guilty as part of a deal to avoid prison time. She got 5 years probation, court-ordered restitution, and community service. The restitution amount is the full 120,000 plus interest and legal fees. She's working 2 jobs now, barely scraping by, every extra penny going to pay back our parents. It's going to take her at least 15 years at her current rate. Our parents are trying to rebuild their retirement fund, but they're in their early 60s now. The money Emily stole was supposed to grow for another decade. Instead, they're starting over with less time and less principle. Dad talks about working until he's 70. Mum picks up extra shifts at the hospital. They try not to be bitter, but I can see it in their faces sometimes. The family doesn't talk to Emily anymore. She's not invited to holidays, weddings, birthdays, anything. She tried reaching out a few times, sending apology letters, but nobody responds. Our grandmother said it best at last year's Christmas dinner when someone mentioned Emily's name. She said, "I don't have a granddaughter named Emily. That person died when she decided her designer handbags were more important than her parents' future." The thing that still gets me is how long she maintained the lie. 2 years of looking our parents in the eye at Sunday dinners, listening to Dad worry about money, watching Mum stress about retirement, all while actively stealing from them. That takes a special kind of sociopath. She didn't just steal money, she stole their security, their trust, their peace of mind. And for what? So she could pretend to be someone she wasn't to impress people who didn't actually care about her? I think about the recording sometimes, her voice bragging about manipulating our clueless family. I wonder if she ever felt guilty, or if the thrill of her fake life was enough to drown out any conscience she might have had. I hope the next 15 years of restitution payments give her plenty of time to think about it. Family secrets have a way of destroying everything, and nothing prepared this person for what they'd learn about their father's hidden past. A stranger approached me at a coffee shop claiming to be my half-sister. Just walked right up to my table where I was working on my laptop. Said, "Excuse me, are you Daniel Martinez?" And when I said yes, she introduced herself as Rebecca and told me we had the same father. I thought she was confused or maybe running some kind of scam. I told her she had the wrong person. She sat down anyway, uninvited, and slid a folder across the table. Inside were birth certificates, old photographs, court documents. My dad's face stared back at me from a photo dated 1998, his arm around a woman I'd never seen, holding a baby. The baby's birth certificate listed his name as the father, Rebecca Martinez. My first instinct was still denial. Photos can be faked, documents can be forged, but she kept talking, filling in details that were too specific to be made up. She knew my dad's full name, his birthday, the town where he grew up. She told me about 2 younger siblings I'd apparently never met. She'd been 3 years old when our dad told her mom he was going on a business trip and just never came back. No phone call, no explanation. He vanished. She'd spent years trying to track him down, hired investigators, searched public records, finally found him living 2 states over with a completely different life, a different wife, different kids, me, my younger brother, a respectable job as an accountant, standing in the community as a church deacon. None of it matched the man who'd abandoned his first family without a word. I sat there staring at these documents, my coffee going cold, trying to process what I was hearing. This had to be a mistake. My dad was one of the most dependable people I knew. He coached Little League, he volunteered at the food bank. He'd been married to my mum for 23 years. The idea that he had this entire secret past, that he'd just abandoned a wife and 3 kids, it didn't compute. Rebecca must have seen the doubt on my face because she pulled out her phone and showed me more photos. Our dad at a birthday party in 1996. Our dad holding her as a newborn. Wedding photos with her mum. She had dozens of them spanning years. There was no way all of this was fabricated. I asked her what she wanted. Money? She shook her head. She said she just wanted answers. She wanted to know why he left, why he never paid child support, why he built a whole new life and pretended his first family didn't exist. She'd tracked me down hoping I could help her understand the man who was apparently both our father. I told her I needed time to process this. She gave me her number and said she understood, but please, would I at least ask him about it? She deserved that much. Then she left, and I sat there surrounded by the evidence of my dad's secret life, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. I didn't go home that night. I got a hotel room and spread all the documents out on the bed, going through everything methodically. Birth certificates for Rebecca and her 2 siblings, all listing my dad. A marriage certificate from 1994. Divorce papers that were filed but never finalized because they couldn't locate him to serve them. Court documents showing attempts to collect child support that went nowhere because he'd apparently changed his identity. Changed his identity. That phrase kept circling in my brain. My dad hadn't just left. He'd actively hidden from his responsibilities. He'd become a different person. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house. Dad was in the garage working on some project. I asked if we could talk. He could tell something was wrong immediately. I showed him the folder Rebecca had given me, watched his face go from confused to pale to stricken in the span of about 10 seconds. He didn't deny it. That's what broke me. I'd been holding on to this tiny hope that maybe there was an explanation, some misunderstanding. But he just looked at those photos and documents, and his whole body seemed to collapse in on itself. Then came the breaking point. He told me everything. Back in the 90s, he'd had a serious gambling problem. Started with casual sports betting, escalated to high-stakes poker games, eventually got in deep with some dangerous people. He owed money he couldn't pay. His first marriage was falling apart under the financial stress. He had 3 kids under 5 years old and debt collectors calling constantly, so he made what he called the biggest mistake of his life. He told his wife he had a business trip, packed a bag, and just left. Changed his name, moved states, started over. He said it like it was a single bad decision, not an ongoing choice he made every day for over 2 decades. Like he'd accidentally abandoned his family instead of deliberately building a new life while his first wife struggled to raise 3 kids alone. I asked if Mum knew. He shook his head. Nobody knew. He'd buried that life so completely that he'd almost convinced himself it never happened. He'd become a different person, a better person, he said. Found religion, got clean from gambling, built a good life. He'd told himself his first family was better off without him. The sheer delusion of that statement. Imagine being this confidently wrong about abandoning your children. I told him Rebecca was looking for answers, that she'd found him, that his past wasn't buried anymore. He started crying, asking me not to tell Mom, not to tell anyone, said it would destroy everything he'd built. I told him he should have thought about that 20 years ago. I left him in the garage and went inside to tell my mum. She was in the kitchen making lunch, asking if Dad and I had a nice talk. I showed her the folder, watched her whole world shatter in real time as she flipped through documents proving her husband had an entire secret family, that the man she'd been married to for 23 years had lied about his entire identity. She didn't cry at first, she just got very quiet and very still. Then she asked me to leave because she needed to talk to my dad alone. I heard them screaming at each other from the driveway. Mom filed for divorce within a week. The news spread through our community like wildfire. This was a small town where everyone knew everyone. Dad was a church deacon, respected, trusted. People had looked up to him. Finding out he'd abandoned 3 children and built his life on lies, it was a scandal that consumed everything. The church asked him to step down immediately. Friends stopped calling. Dad's first wife, Rebecca's mum, filed a lawsuit for decades of unpaid child support. The amount with interest and penalties was staggering, over $200,000. But that wasn't even the worst part. Turned out Dad's identity change hadn't been entirely legal. He'd used falsified documents, social security fraud, the kind of thing that carries criminal penalties. Rebecca's mom wanted justice, not just money. She pushed for prosecution. Dad ended up with criminal charges on top of the civil suit. Our family imploded. My younger brother stopped speaking to Dad entirely. Mom moved out and got her own apartment. The house went up for sale to pay legal fees. Dad's accounting firm let him go when the fraud charges became public. His entire carefully constructed life just disintegrated. I started meeting with Rebecca and her siblings. They were understandably angry, but also just wanted to know their father. We were all victims of his choices in different ways. They'd grown up without a dad. I'd grown up with a dad who was living a lie. We started building a relationship slowly, carefully. It's weird having siblings you never knew about, but they're family. Dad pleaded guilty to avoid jail time, got probation and a massive restitution order. Between the child support and the legal penalties, he's going to be paying for the rest of his life. He lost his marriage, his reputation, his career, his standing in the community. Everything. He tried reaching out to me a few months ago, wanted to explain himself again, wanted forgiveness. I told him I needed more time. Maybe eventually I'll be ready to have that conversation. But right now I'm focused on getting to know the siblings he abandoned and processing the fact that my entire childhood was built on lies. The thing that gets me is how long he kept it going. 20 years of waking up every day and choosing to maintain the deception. 20 years of pretending his first family didn't exist. That takes a special kind of compartmentalization that I'll never understand. Mum's doing better now. She's in therapy. She's dating someone new. She says she's rebuilding her life based on honesty this time. My brother's still angry, but he's working through it. Rebecca and I talk regularly. Her siblings are good people who got dealt a terrible hand. As for Dad, last I heard he's working retail and living in a studio apartment. Most of his paycheck going to restitution. His carefully built reputation is gone. The community that once respected him knows exactly who he really is. The best revenge is just giving someone enough rope to hang themselves, and Dad had 20 years of rope. Turns out, mothers can harbor equally devastating secrets, especially when they've spent decades manipulating the entire narrative of your childhood. I always believed my father abandoned us when I was 5, a story my mom repeated so often it became part of my identity. She'd tell anyone who'd listen. The grocery store clerk, my teachers at parent-teacher conferences, random people at the park. My father was a deadbeat who walked out on his family and never looked back. She'd get teary-eyed, play the single mother martyr role perfectly, and people would rally around her. I grew up watching her weaponize this narrative for sympathy, for help, for control over every aspect of my life. The story never changed. Dad left one Tuesday morning, said he was going to work, and never came home. No goodbye, no explanation, no child support. Just gone. Mom would sigh and say she did everything she could to track him down, but he'd vanished completely. She'd sacrificed everything to raise me alone. Every time she told it, I felt this mix of anger at my father for abandoning me and guilt that my mom had to struggle because of his selfishness. I carried that story with me for 23 years. It shaped how I viewed relationships, trust, everything. Then at 28, I did one of those DNA tests. Just for fun, really. I wanted to know about my ancestry, maybe find some distant cousins. I wasn't expecting what I got. The results came back and I had a close match. Parent or child, the site said. I stared at that for a solid 10 minutes trying to make sense of it. I didn't have kids, which meant this was a parent. My mom had already done a test a year earlier during her brief genealogy phase, so I knew it wasn't her, which left only one possibility. I clicked on the match. His name was Robert Chen. He'd left a message. If you're seeing this, I've been looking for you for over 20 years. Please contact me. I'm your father. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped my phone. This had to be a mistake. Some glitch in the system. My father abandoned us. He didn't spend 20 years searching. He didn't care. but something made me click the contact button. I sent a message. I think there's been a mistake. He responded within an hour. No mistake. He knew my birthday. He knew my mom's full name, including her maiden name. He knew the city where we'd lived when I was 5. He asked if we could talk on the phone. Against every instinct screaming at me to block him and forget this ever happened, I said yes. The conversation that followed destroyed everything I thought I knew about my childhood. Robert, my father, told me he didn't abandon us. He came home from work that Tuesday to find me and my mum gone. Completely gone. The apartment cleared out like we'd never existed. He filed a missing persons report immediately, hired private investigators, spent his entire savings trying to find us. My mum had taken me during a custody dispute and vanished, changing both our names and moving across the country. I didn't believe him. I couldn't. This was my mom he was talking about. She wouldn't do that. She was the victim in this story, not the villain. I told him he was lying, that he was trying to manipulate me. He said he understood my reaction and that he had proof. Court documents, police reports, 23 years of searching. He emailed me everything. I spent 3 days going through it all, cross-referencing, verifying. The court records were real. There had been a custody case. My mum had been ordered to share custody, 50-50. She'd violated that order and disappeared with me 2 weeks later. There was a warrant out for her arrest for parental kidnapping that had only expired 5 years ago, due to statute of limitations. There were private investigator reports detailing dead ends and false leads. There were letters my father had written to me over the years, saved in a folder, letters he'd hoped to give me someday. Letters for my birthdays, my graduations, milestones he'd missed. He'd never stopped looking. He'd never stopped hoping. And here's where it gets absurd. My mum had convinced everyone that my father was dangerous. She'd told our relatives he was abusive, unstable, a threat to our safety. She'd fabricated an entire history of violence that never happened. I called my aunt, my mum's sister, and asked her what she remembered about my dad. She said Mum told her he'd hit her, that she'd feared for my safety, that running was the only option. None of it was true. I'd seen the court records. There was never any evidence of abuse, no restraining orders, no police reports, nothing. I confronted my mum over dinner at her place. I brought my laptop with all the evidence queued up. I asked her point blank if Dad had really abandoned us. She launched into the usual story without hesitation. He left. He was selfish. He never cared. I let her finish, then I turned my laptop around and showed her the court documents. The look on her face was something I'll never forget. Pure panic. She started backtracking immediately, said the courts were biased, said my father had manipulated the system, said I didn't understand what really happened. I asked her to explain the warrant for her arrest. She said my father had lied to police. I asked her about changing our names. She said it was for our safety. I asked her about the private investigator reports showing 23 years of searching. She just kept saying I didn't understand. I told her I'd been talking to my father, that he'd told me his side, that I'd verified everything. She exploded, called him a liar, called me ungrateful, said after everything she'd sacrificed, this was how I repaid her? By believing a man who'd abandoned us, except he hadn't abandoned us. She'd kidnapped me. She'd stolen 23 years of my life with my father and convinced me it was his fault. I left her apartment and didn't speak to her for 2 weeks while I processed everything. During that time, I talked to my father almost daily, learned about his life, learned about the sister I never knew existed, born a year after Mum took me, a whole half of my family that had been erased from my life. My father had remarried, had another daughter, but he said there wasn't a day he didn't think about me. He'd kept my room in their house exactly as he'd imagined it, hoping I'd come home someday. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. I decided the truth needed to come out, not just between me and my mom, but to everyone she'd lied to for over 2 decades. I organized a family gathering at my aunt's house, told everyone it was important, that I had something to share. My mum came assuming I'd come to my senses and wanted to apologize. She had no idea what was about to happen. Once everyone was there, about 15 family members total, I connected my laptop to the TV. I started by asking my mum to tell everyone the story of how my father abandoned us. She looked confused but complied, telling the familiar tale. Everyone nodded sympathetically. They'd heard it 100 times. Then I said I had something to show them. I played a pre-recorded video call with my father. He introduced himself, explained what had really happened, showed the court documents on camera, the police reports, the evidence of his search. My mum tried to leave. My uncle blocked the door, said she needed to stay and face this. The room was dead silent except for my father's voice, explaining how my mum had kidnapped me, how she'd lied about abuse, how she'd destroyed our family. When the video ended, I showed them the court records myself, let them read the custody agreement she'd violated, showed them the warrant, showed them the private investigator reports. My mum just sat there, her lies unraveling in real time, in front of everyone who'd supported her story for decades. My aunt started crying. She'd helped my mom hide from my father in those early years, believing she was protecting us from an abuser. She'd been an accessory to a kidnapping based on lies. Other family members were angry, demanding answers from my mom. She tried to defend herself, but nothing she said made sense anymore. The evidence was overwhelming. I told them I'd reconnected with my father and that I was planning to visit him and meet my sister. My mom broke down completely, begging me not to go, saying he'd manipulate me, that she was protecting me. My uncle, her own brother, told her to stop, said she'd done enough damage. The family was horrified. Most of them left that day and haven't spoken to my mum since. I flew out to meet my father 2 weeks later. Meeting him in person was surreal. He looked exactly like me, same nose, same eyes. Meeting my sister was even stranger. She was 22 and we looked like twins despite never growing up together. She said she'd always known about me, had always hoped we'd meet someday. My father never remarried with anger toward my mom, which honestly made it harder. He just seemed sad about the lost time. He didn't want revenge or even an apology. He just wanted a relationship with me now. We're building that slowly. It's awkward sometimes trying to compress 23 years of catching up into visits and phone calls, but it's real. It's honest. It's not built on lies. My mom is facing consequences now, even though the statute of limitations protected her from criminal charges. The family has mostly cut contact. She lost her job when the story got out. She's alone, and part of me feels guilty about that. But a bigger part of me knows she chose this. She chose to kidnap me. She chose to lie for decades. She chose to make me hate a father who never stopped loving me. The hardest part is grieving the childhood I should have had. The relationship with my dad I was robbed of. The sister I could have grown up with. My mom stole all of that from me and convinced me it was someone else's fault. That's a betrayal that doesn't just heal. I talk to my dad almost every day now. I visited my sister last month and we're planning a trip together next year. I'm building a relationship with the family I was stolen from. And my mom, she's living with the consequences of a lie that was always going to fall apart eventually. She just didn't expect it to happen like this, in front of everyone, with nowhere left to hide. Sometimes the people closest to you aren't just hiding secrets, they're actively sabotaging your life. Like when this person's own brother decided to throw them under the bus. When $5,000 went missing from our grandmother's account, my brother Marcus immediately pointed fingers at me, claiming he'd seen me acting suspicious around her house. $5,000. That's not pocket change. That's not something you misplace. That's someone deliberately taking money from an 82-year-old woman who trusted her family. I found out about the accusation on a Sunday. The whole family was at my parents' house for dinner, and the atmosphere was weird from the moment I walked in. People weren't making eye contact. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Finally, my dad pulled me aside and asked if we could talk privately. That's when he told me that money had gone missing from Grandma's account, and that Marcus had seen me going through her things last week when I'd stopped by to help her with yard work. I just stared at him. Marcus said what? I hadn't gone through anything. I'd mowed her lawn, trimmed some hedges, had a sandwich with her, and left. That was it. But my dad had this look on his face, this disappointed resignation that made my stomach turn. He wanted to believe me, I could tell, but Marcus was so certain. Marcus had details. Apparently, I'd been in her bedroom, near her dresser where she kept her checkbook. I'd been acting nervous, looking over my shoulder. None of that happened. I told my dad that. I'd never even been upstairs that day. But here's the thing about Marcus. He's always been the golden child. Straight A student, successful career, married with 2 kids, the whole package. I'm the younger sibling who took a little longer to find my path, who didn't go to college right away, who's had a few rough patches. So when it came down to his word against mine, The family math wasn't exactly in my favor. My mom suggested maybe I'd borrowed the money and forgotten. Maybe I was going through a hard time financially and didn't want to ask for help. The implication was clear. They thought I did it. My grandmother, the woman who'd helped raise me, who'd been at every school play and birthday party, she looked at me with tears in her eyes and asked me to just tell the truth. She said she'd forgive me if I just admitted it and paid her back. I felt like the ground was falling out from under me. These were people who'd known me my entire life, and they were ready to believe I'd steal from my own grandmother, based on Marcus's testimony. I told them I didn't do it. I told them I had no idea where the money went. I begged them to believe me. My grandmother just looked away. The next few days were a nightmare. Family group chats that I was suddenly removed from. Cousins who stopped responding to my texts. My aunt called to tell me how disappointed she was in me, how grandma had done so much for our family, and this was how I repaid her. I tried to defend myself, but no one wanted to hear it. Marcus had poisoned the well too effectively. That's when I decided to prove my innocence the only way I could think of. I went to Grandma's house when I knew she'd be at her weekly bridge game and installed hidden cameras. Small ones, the kind that looked like phone chargers and smoke detectors. I put them in common areas, nothing invasive, just enough to capture who was coming and going. I also checked her existing security system and realized the footage was stored on a local hard drive that I could access. Nobody had bothered to check it because everyone was so sure I was guilty. I spent that night going through weeks of footage. At first, I wasn't finding anything useful. Just grandma going about her day, the occasional visit from family members, nothing suspicious. Then I started noticing a pattern. Marcus was there a lot more than anyone realized. He'd stop by at odd times, always when grandma was out. He had a key, which made sense since he helped her with errands, but the frequency was strange, and here's where it gets absurd. I found footage from 3 months back of Marcus letting himself in, going straight to grandma's bedroom and opening her dresser drawer. He took out her checkbook, wrote himself a check, forged her signature, and put everything back. The whole thing took less than 5 minutes. He did this again 2 weeks later, and again a month after that. I kept scrubbing through footage and found at least 6 instances of him stealing from her, sometimes cash, sometimes checks. The most recent was from the week before, the same time frame when he claimed he'd seen me acting suspicious. My hands were shaking as I compiled the clips. Marcus hadn't just stolen from grandma, he'd systematically robbed her over months, and then, when he must have realized an audit or bank statement review was coming, he'd framed me to get ahead of it. He'd thrown his own brother under the bus to save himself. I copied all the footage onto a flash drive and called a family meeting, told everyone I had proof of my innocence and needed them all there. Marcus tried to say he was busy, but my dad insisted. The whole family showed up at my parents' house that Saturday, probably expecting me to confess or make some desperate plea. Instead, I plugged the flash drive into the TV and pressed play. The room went silent as they watched Marcus let himself into Grandma's house on the screen. You could see the date and timestamp clearly. He walked through her living room, up the stairs, into her bedroom. The camera angle was perfect. You could see him open the dresser, take out the checkbook, write a check, forge the signature. My mum gasped. My dad's face went red. Grandma had her hand over her mouth. I played the next clip, and the next. 6 different instances of Marcus stealing from her, spread out over months, thousands of dollars total. The family just sat there in shock. When the final clip ended, I turned to Marcus. His face had gone completely white. He looked like he might throw up. Then I played one more clip. This one was from Grandma's new hidden cameras, from just 2 days ago. Marcus, letting himself in again, going to her safe this time. The one in her closet that only family knew about. Taking cash. This was after he'd already accused me. After the family had already turned against me. He was still doing it. Things went from bad to unhinged. Marcus tried to stammer out an explanation, said the footage was edited, that I must have faked it somehow, but the timestamps were clear, the angles were consistent with Grandma's actual security system. My dad demanded to see Grandma's checkbook. She got it, and we went through the entries together. 6 checks made out to Marcus, all forged, all cashed. The bank statements confirmed it. He'd taken nearly $12,000 total. Grandma started crying. Not sad crying, angry crying. She'd known Marcus his whole life. She'd helped pay for his wedding, she'd been there when his kids were born, and he'd been robbing her blind while letting everyone think I was the thief. She looked at him and asked him why. He didn't have an answer, just sat there, staring at his hands. My dad asked if Marcus had gambling debts or something. He shook his head. Apparently, he'd been living beyond his means, trying to maintain an image of success that his actual salary couldn't support. The luxury car, the country club membership, the expensive vacations he posted about on social media, all of it funded partially by stealing from his own grandmother. And when he'd gotten worried about getting caught, his solution was to frame me. I'll never forget what my grandmother said next. She looked at Marcus and said, "You didn't just steal my money, you tried to steal your brother's character." Then she told him to leave her house and not come back. The family was stunned. Some of my aunts tried to argue for leniency, saying Marcus made a mistake that family should forgive, but Grandma shut that down immediately. She said what Marcus did wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. Multiple choices made over months, including the choice to destroy his brother's reputation to save himself. Grandma pressed charges. Marcus pleaded guilty to avoid trial, probably because the video evidence was ironclad. He got probation, community service, and a court order to pay full restitution, plus damages. He also lost his job when his employer found out about the conviction. The country club membership went away. The luxury car got sold. His entire carefully constructed image collapsed. Our relationship is permanently destroyed. I don't think I'll ever be able to look at him the same way. It's not even about the money. It's about the fact that he was willing to let our entire family believe I was a thief, rather than face consequences for his own actions. He sat at family dinners and watched me be ostracized, watched Grandma cry over what she thought I'd done, and said nothing. That's not something you come back from. The family apologized to me, but it felt hollow. They'd been so quick to believe the worst, so ready to cut me off without even investigating. I've forgiven them mostly, but things aren't the same. Trust, once broken like that, doesn't fully repair. Grandma and I are closer now than we've ever been. She feels guilty for doubting me, even though I've told her she had no reason to suspect Marcus. We have coffee every week, and she's made it very clear in her will that Marcus gets nothing. Not out of spite, she says, but because someone who steals from family doesn't deserve an inheritance. The hidden cameras are still there, by the way, not because we don't trust people, but because we learn that sometimes the people you trust most are the ones you should be watching. Being framed is one thing, but imagine your own partner gaslighting you into believing you're losing your mind. For months, Alex told me I was paranoid and imagining things when I noticed strange behavior. Late nights at the office that didn't match their calendar. Secretive phone calls they'd take in another room. Weekend work trips that seemed to pop up out of nowhere. Every time I brought it up, Alex had an explanation ready. A big project, an important client, a work emergency. And every time they'd look at me with this concerned expression and say I was overthinking things. At first, I believed them. Alex had never given me a reason not to trust them before. We'd been together for 3 years. We lived together. We talked about marriage. Why would they lie? But the weird inconsistencies kept piling up. They'd mention grabbing dinner with coworkers at a restaurant. Then I'd see a charge from a completely different place on our shared credit card. They'd say they were exhausted from meetings all day, but their step counter would show barely any movement. I started questioning myself. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe my last relationship, which ended badly, had left me with trust issues I hadn't dealt with. When I brought up my concerns again, Alex sat me down for a serious conversation. They said they were worried about me, that my anxiety seemed to be getting worse, that maybe I should talk to someone professionally, because these accusations were coming from nowhere, and it wasn't healthy. They were so convincing, so calm and rational, while I felt like I was spiraling. They suggested couples therapy too, said they wanted to support me through whatever I was going through. The implication was clear. The problem wasn't them, it was me. I was the one with issues that needed fixing. So I went to therapy, spent sessions talking about my insecurity and anxiety. My therapist was actually helpful, taught me coping mechanisms and how to communicate better. But she also said something that stuck with me. She said that while anxiety can make you see problems that aren't there, sometimes anxiety is your brain picking up on real inconsistencies that you can't quite articulate yet. Trust your gut, but verify. I started paying closer attention, not obsessively, just noting things. Alex said they had a conference in Seattle. I casually asked about it later, and they mentioned different hotels on different days. When I pointed that out, they got defensive, said I was tracking their every word, that this was exactly the kind of behavior we'd talked about in therapy. I backed off, feeling guilty, but something still felt wrong. I couldn't shake it. Then I received an anonymous message. Just showed up in my Instagram DMs one morning from an account with no profile picture and a random string of numbers as the username. The message said, "I think you should know the truth about Alex," followed by a link to a shared photo album. My hands were shaking when I opened it. The album contained dozens of photos spanning several months. Alex with someone else, holding hands at a park, kissing outside a movie theater, sitting at a romantic dinner, laughing on what looked like a beach vacation. They were date photos, couple photos, the kind of pictures Alex and I used to take together. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. All those times Alex had called me paranoid, told me I was imagining things, suggested I needed professional help, they'd been lying. Gaslighting me into doubting my own perception of reality while actively cheating. I didn't confront Alex immediately. I needed proof that would hold up, not just anonymous photos they could explain away. I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. Cost me $2,000 I couldn't really afford, but I needed to know the full truth. The investigator worked fast. Within 2 weeks, I had a comprehensive report that made me physically nauseous. Alex had been maintaining a full relationship with their ex, someone named Jordan. They'd been together for at least 8 months, maybe longer. Weekend getaways that Alex told me were work trips were actually romantic vacations with Jordan. The late nights were dinners and sleepovers. The secretive phone calls were planning their future together. Here's where it gets absurd. Jordan didn't know about me either. The investigator had done some digging into Jordan's social media and found posts about their wonderful relationship with Alex, about how they'd reconnected after years apart, about how Alex was the one. Jordan thought they were in an exclusive relationship just like I did. Alex had been playing both of us, keeping us as options, lying to both of us with apparently equal skill. The investigator's report included screenshots of text conversations between Alex and Jordan. I don't know how he got them, and I didn't ask, but reading through them was like looking into a mirror. Alex used the same pet names with Jordan that they used with me, made the same promises, told the same jokes. They'd built an identical relationship with both of us, just in different time slots. There was one text exchange that particularly gutted me. Jordan had asked Alex when they were going to tell their family about the relationship, make it official. Alex responded that they needed to handle some loose ends first, that there was someone from their past who was having trouble letting go, that someone was me. I wasn't Alex's partner. I was a loose end. I sat with this information for a few days, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to just pack my stuff and ghost. Let Alex come home to an empty apartment and figure it out. But that felt like letting them off too easy. They'd spent months making me feel crazy, destroying my confidence, gaslighting me into therapy. They didn't deserve a quiet exit. I decided to reach out to Jordan, found them on social media and sent a message introducing myself as Alex's partner of 3 years. Attached some of the investigator's findings. Jordan responded within an hour, confused and defensive at first. Thought I was some kind of stalker or crazy ex. I sent more proof. Photos of Alex and me together, lease agreements, utility bills in both our names, evidence of a shared life. Jordan called me. We talked for 2 hours, compared notes on Alex's behavior, the lies we'd both been told, the manipulation tactics. It was eerie how identical our experiences were. Alex had told Jordan that their job required a lot of travel, which explained the absences. Told Jordan they were private about relationships and didn't like social media, which explained why they never posted together. Every excuse, every explanation, it all matched what they'd told me. We were both furious, not at each other, at Alex. This person we'd both trusted had been playing us like characters in separate shows, keeping the storylines carefully segregated so they never overlapped. Until now. Jordan and I hatched a plan. Alex had a dinner reservation that coming Friday at their favorite upscale restaurant. The investigator's report showed it was meant to be a date with Jordan. Alex had told me they had a work dinner that night, wouldn't be home until late. We decided to both show up. Friday came. I spent the day alternating between rage and nausea. Jordan and I had been texting all week, coordinating timing, making sure we were on the same page. The plan was simple. Jordan would arrive first, right on time for the reservation. I'd show up 15 minutes later. We'd both confront Alex together. That's when everything unraveled. I got to the restaurant and spotted them immediately at a corner table. Alex was mid-laugh at something Jordan had said, looking relaxed and happy, looking exactly like they did when we went on dates. I walked straight to the table. Alex's face went from confused to horrified in the span of a heartbeat. Their mouth literally fell open. Jordan stood up and said, "Alex, this is your partner, the one you live with, the one you've been with for 3 years." I sat down in the empty chair and added, "And this is Jordan, your other partner, the one you've been seeing for 8 months." Alex tried to sputter out some explanation, something about how this wasn't what it looked like, how they could explain. Jordan cut them off. "Don't bother. We've been comparing notes all week. We know everything." I pulled out my phone and started listing facts. "You told Jordan you had to travel for work, but you were actually home with me. You told me you had work dinners, but you were out with Jordan. You've been gaslighting both of us, making us feel crazy for noticing your sketchy behavior. You convinced me to go to therapy for trust issues while you were actively cheating." Other diners were starting to stare. Alex's face was bright red. They kept looking between Jordan and me like they were trying to figure out how to salvage this. There was no salvaging it. The waiter came over to ask if everything was okay. Jordan said, "Actually, we're leaving. Alex will be dining alone tonight." We both stood up. Alex reached for my arm, trying to get me to stay, to talk. I pulled away. Jordan was already walking toward the door. I followed. Behind us, I heard Alex calling our names, voice cracking with desperation. We didn't look back. Jordan and I went to a bar down the street and got aggressively drunk while swapping Alex horror stories. Turned out there were even more lies neither of us had known about. Small things, big things, an entire web of deception that had kept two separate relationships running simultaneously. We laughed about how ridiculous it was, how much effort Alex had put into maintaining this double life. Then we cried because we'd both genuinely loved this person who turned out to be a complete fraud. I moved out of the apartment that weekend while Alex was out. Jordan helped. We'd formed this weird trauma bond, united by our mutual experience of being manipulated by the same person. Alex tried calling, texting, showing up at my work. I blocked them everywhere. Jordan did the same. The best part, mutual friends started asking questions when Alex's relationship status suddenly imploded, and two different people had similar stories. Alex's reputation in our social circle completely tanked. People who'd known them for years started re-evaluating past behaviors, seeing the manipulation that had always been there. Last I heard, Alex tried dating someone new and got dumped within weeks when they pulled the same secretive behavior. Turns out once your pattern is exposed, it's hard to run the same con twice in the same social circle. Looking back, the gaslighting was almost worse than the cheating. The cheating was a betrayal, but the gaslighting made me doubt my own mind. Alex had systematically undermined my ability to trust my own perceptions, convinced me I was mentally unstable, all while doing exactly what I suspected. That kind of manipulation leaves scars that take time to heal. I'm in therapy still, but now for actual reasons instead of manufactured ones, working through the mindfuck of being gaslit for months. Jordan and I still talk sometimes. We're not close friends, but we check in. We're both doing better. Both learned to trust our instincts again. At least that person discovered the truth eventually. But what happens when your ex takes revenge by creating an entirely fake version of you online? After our breakup, screenshots of my messages started circulating online. Racist remarks, cruel insults about mutual friends, hateful rants about people I'd never even had problems with. Except I never wrote any of it. None of those messages came from me, but there they were, spreading across social media with my name attached, destroying everything I'd built in the span of about 48 hours. The first screenshot appeared on a Monday. Someone tagged me in a post asking if I'd really said those things about our mutual friend Kayla. The message was supposedly from me, calling her a string of vile names and making comments about her appearance that made me sick to read. I immediately denied it, said my account must have been hacked. Most people seemed to believe me at first. Then more screenshots appeared. Messages where I allegedly used racial slurs. Conversations where I supposedly trash-talked my coworkers by name. A particularly nasty thread where I apparently mocked someone's dead relative. Each one worse than the last, each one with my profile picture, my name, timestamp, and everything formatted exactly like real text messages. By Wednesday, I was getting blocked left and right. People I'd known for years wouldn't respond to my attempts to explain. They'd seen the screenshots. They had proof, or what looked like proof, that I was a terrible person who said horrible things behind people's backs. My protest that I'd been framed just sounded like exactly what a guilty person would say. Thursday, my employer called me in for a meeting. They'd received multiple complaints about my online behavior. Screenshots had been forwarded to HR. The messages allegedly showed me making discriminatory comments about colleagues. Company policy was clear on harassment. They were putting me on administrative leave pending investigation. I was losing everything: my job, my friends, my reputation, all because of messages I never sent. And I knew exactly who was behind it: Tyler, my ex. We'd had a brutal breakup 2 months earlier. Tyler had not taken it well, had sent me dozens of messages saying I'd regret leaving, that I'd ruined their life, that they'd make sure I paid for what I'd done. I'd blocked Tyler everywhere and tried to move on. Apparently, Tyler had other plans, but knowing Tyler was behind it and proving it were two completely different things, the screenshots looked real. They had the right formatting, the right timestamps, the right interface. If I accused Tyler without evidence, it would just look like I was deflecting blame. So I hired a digital forensics expert. Cost me $2,000 I really couldn't afford at that point, but I was desperate. I gave them every screenshot that had been circulating, access to my actual message history, and permission to dig into whatever they needed. They told me it would take about a week. Those were the longest 7 days of my life. More screenshots kept appearing. My social media mentions were full of people calling me out, saying they'd always known I was fake, that my true colors were finally showing. I stopped looking at my phone, stopped going online, just waited for the forensic report and tried not to have a complete breakdown. When the expert finally sent me their findings, I read the whole thing 3 times to make sure I understood it correctly. Every single screenshot was fake, not just edited but completely fabricated using image manipulation software. Tyler had created the entire conversation threads from scratch, photoshopping text bubbles and metadata to make them look authentic. The expert could tell because of tiny inconsistencies in the font rendering, the pixel alignment of the speech bubbles, and metadata that didn't match the supposed timestamps. But that wasn't even the worst part. The expert found that Tyler had been planning this for weeks before the first screenshot appeared. There were practice versions saved on cloud storage that Tyler apparently forgot to delete, showing earlier attempts at faking the messages with different wording. Tyler had refined the technique over time, getting better at making them look real. This wasn't a crime of passion, it was premeditated character assassination. I had proof now, but I needed more. I went back through every communication I'd ever had with Tyler, looking for anything that could establish motive. Found emails from right after our breakup, where Tyler explicitly threatened to ruin my life. Voicemails where Tyler screamed that I'd be sorry. Text messages before I blocked them saying everyone would see what a terrible person I really was. Tyler had basically confessed to planning this, just not to actually doing it. I compiled everything into one comprehensive post, the forensic analysis showing how each screenshot was fabricated, side-by-side comparisons highlighting the digital inconsistencies, screenshots of Tyler's threats, a timeline showing the escalation from breakup to character destruction. I spent hours making sure it was airtight, that every claim was backed by evidence, that there was no room for doubt. Then I posted it publicly, tagged everyone who'd shared the fake screenshots, explained exactly what had happened and how Tyler had systematically destroyed my reputation using fabricated evidence. I kept the tone factual, not emotional, just laid out the facts and let people draw their own conclusions. The post started getting traction immediately. People who'd believed the fake messages were shocked. The forensic analysis was pretty damning. Those technical details about font rendering and metadata made it clear these weren't just edited but completely manufactured. Within hours, the post had been shared hundreds of times. Tyler tried to respond, claimed I was lying, that the forensic analysis was fake, but by then, too many people had looked at the evidence. Tech-savvy friends started doing their own analysis of the screenshots and confirming what my expert had found. The inconsistencies were obvious once you knew what to look for. Tyler's credibility evaporated fast. And here's where it gets absurd. Tyler's employer saw the post. Turns out Tyler worked in social media management for a mid-sized marketing firm, a job that required trustworthiness and ethical behavior. A job that became impossible to keep once their boss discovered they'd spent weeks manufacturing fake evidence to destroy someone's reputation online. Tyler was fired within 24 hours of my post going viral. Former friends started reaching out to apologize. They'd been quick to believe the screenshots without questioning them, without giving me a chance to defend myself. Some of the apologies felt genuine. Others felt more like people covering themselves now that the truth was out. I accepted them all, but was careful about who I actually let back into my life. My employer called me back in. The investigation had concluded that the complaints were based on fabricated evidence. They reinstated me with back pay for the administrative leave. HR actually apologized, said they should have been more thorough before taking action. I appreciated it, but couldn't help thinking about how quickly they'd been willing to believe the worst about me. Tyler wasn't done facing consequences, though. I consulted with a lawyer about defamation and harassment charges. The lawyer said I had an extremely strong case. The premeditation, the fabricated evidence, the measurable damage to my reputation and employment, it all added up to serious legal liability. We sent Tyler a formal demand letter outlining the civil case we were prepared to file. Tyler's lawyer responded asking to settle. They knew they had no defense. We went back and forth for a few weeks and eventually reached an agreement. Tyler paid a settlement that covered my legal fees, the forensic expert, lost wages, and damages. Tyler also had to sign a legally binding agreement to never contact me again and to post a public retraction admitting to fabricating the screenshots. The retraction post was brief, but it existed. Tyler admitted to creating fake screenshots and apologized for the harm caused. It didn't go viral like my exposure post had, but enough people saw it. My name was mostly cleared. Mostly. Because here's the thing about a destroyed reputation. Even when the truth comes out, even when the accusations are proven false, there's always some residual damage. Some people never saw the follow-up. They just remember hearing something bad about me and moved on. Some people saw the truth but still kept their distance, like I might be drama even if I was the victim. Rebuilding trust after something like this is slow and exhausting. I'm doing better now. Got my job back, reconnected with real friends who actually gave me the benefit of the doubt. I'm more careful about who I let into my life and what I share online. The experience taught me exactly how dangerous a vindictive ex can be when they're willing to put in the effort to destroy you. Tyler, last I heard, is working some retail job and living with family. Lost the career, the reputation, and from what mutual acquaintances say, most of their friend group too. Turns out people don't like associating with someone who manufactures evidence to ruin lives. The settlement payments are probably stretching their budget pretty thin too. I think about it sometimes, how close I came to losing everything over completely fabricated messages. If I hadn't had the money for that forensic expert, if the analysis hadn't been so conclusive, if Tyler had been just slightly better at the Photoshop work, I might still be dealing with the fallout. My career could be over, my friendships destroyed, all because someone couldn't handle a breakup like an adult. The whole experience made me paranoid in ways I'm still working through. I screenshot everything now, keep records of all my communications, watch my online presence carefully. It's exhausting but necessary. Because I learned firsthand how easy it is for someone to create a completely false narrative about you, and how willing people are to believe it without question. Sometimes the danger doesn't come from someone you know well. Sometimes it comes from a complete stranger who somehow knows way too much about your private life. A woman approached me at the gym, and the first thing she said was, "Are you still fighting with Rachel about the thermostat thing?" I froze mid-rep. I didn't know this person. I'd never seen her before in my life, and she was asking about an argument I'd had with my girlfriend 3 days ago in the privacy of our apartment. I put down the weights and asked who she was. She introduced herself as Monica, said she worked in marketing downtown. Totally normal introduction. Then she said she was concerned about me and thought I should know something. I asked what she was talking about. She mentioned the nickname Rachel and I had for each other, something we'd never shared with anyone. She knew about the restaurant where we had our first date. She knew about the trip we'd taken to Colorado last summer. I asked her point blank if she was following me. She looked uncomfortable, said no, but that she'd been following my relationship for months. Following my relationship. Those words didn't make sense. You can't follow someone's relationship unless you're stalking them. I demanded to know how she knew these things. She said she couldn't explain, that I needed to figure it out myself, but that she felt guilty staying silent. Then she just walked away, leaving me standing there completely freaked out. I went home and tore the apartment apart looking for hidden cameras. Checked every smoke detector, every outlet, every corner where someone could hide a device. Nothing. I downloaded spyware detection apps on my phone, ran scans on my laptop, changed all my passwords. I was convinced someone had hacked our accounts or was actively surveilling us. Rachel came home and found me unscrewing the vents, asked what I was doing. I told her about Monica. She seemed concerned, said it was probably just some weird stalker, that we should report it. But I couldn't let it go. Someone out there knew intimate details about my life, and I needed to know how. I started retracing everything Rachel and I had done recently, everywhere we'd been, trying to figure out where the leak was. Had we been too loud? Were our walls thin enough that neighbors could hear everything? I was spiraling, barely sleeping, obsessively checking over my shoulder everywhere I went. Then I made the mistake of using Rachel's laptop when mine was charging. She'd left it open on the couch. I wasn't trying to snoop, I just needed to check my email real quick. But when I opened the browser, her bookmarks were visible. One of them was titled My Blog Dashboard. I didn't even know she had a blog. Curiosity got the better of me. I clicked it. What I found made my stomach drop. It was a relationship blog, thousands of followers, posts going back almost 2 years, which was basically the entire length of our relationship. The most recent post was titled The Thermostat Wars Continue, and it was a detailed, mocking account of our argument from 3 days ago. The one Monica had somehow known about. She'd written it like I was some kind of character in a sitcom, playing up my frustration for laughs, adding commentary about how ridiculous I was being. I scrolled down, post after post detailing our private moments, arguments we'd had, intimate conversations, my insecurities that I'd shared in confidence. She'd posted photos of me sleeping with captions making fun of how I looked. She'd shared screenshots of our text conversations. She'd even posted about my job struggles and family issues, things I'd told her in vulnerable moments, twisted into entertainment for strangers. But that wasn't even the worst part. The comment sections were active, hundreds of people discussing our relationship like it was a reality show, picking apart my behavior, offering Rachel advice on how to handle me, calling me names, making jokes at my expense, and Rachel was responding to them, engaging with her audience, laughing along. She'd built an entire community around humiliating me. I found posts about our sex life, about arguments with my family, about the time I cried watching a movie, and she'd apparently thought it was pathetic enough to share with the internet. Every private moment, every vulnerability, every piece of our relationship had been commodified for content. The blog had sponsors, she was making money off this. Off me. I sat there reading for hours, going through 2 years of my life, presented as comedy material. The person I loved, the person I trusted more than anyone, had been exploiting me for entertainment and profit this entire time. Every intimate moment we'd shared, she'd been mentally cataloguing it for her next post. Every time I'd confided in her, she'd been planning how to spin it for her audience. I checked her follow count. 14,000 people had been watching my life without my knowledge or consent. 14,000 strangers knew things about me that I'd never agreed to share. Monica was one of them, someone who'd felt guilty enough to try to warn me, but not guilty enough to just tell me the truth outright. I took screenshots of everything, every post, every photo, every comment. Then I closed the laptop and waited for Rachel to get home from work. I needed to think about how to handle this. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me wanted to just leave and never speak to her again. But I needed answers first. When Rachel got home that evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open. I'd transferred all the screenshots to my computer. I asked her if she had anything to tell me. She looked confused, asked what I meant. I turned my laptop around and showed her own blog displayed on my screen. Her face went pale, then red. Then she started laughing. Actually laughing. She said, "Oh my God, you found it." Like it was a game. Like I'd discovered a surprise party instead of a massive violation of my privacy. I asked her how long she'd been doing this. She said since basically the beginning of our relationship. Said it started as just a fun way to process her feelings, but then people started following and it became this whole thing. I asked if she understood that what she'd done was a violation, that she'd shared intimate details of my life without my consent, that she'd made money off my vulnerabilities. She rolled her eyes, said I was overreacting. It was just content. Everyone blogs about their relationships. I was being dramatic. That's when everything unraveled. I told her everyone does not post photos of their partner sleeping without permission. Everyone does not share their partner's private struggles with thousands of strangers. Everyone does not monetize their relationship without telling the other person. She got defensive, said she'd changed names and details, that it wasn't like anyone knew it was specifically me. I pulled up posts where she'd used my actual first name, posts with photos clearly showing my face, posts mentioning my workplace by name. She switched tactics, said I was being controlling, that she had a right to share her own experiences. I told her these weren't just her experiences, they were our experiences, private moments that required both of our consent to share. She'd violated that trust in the most fundamental way possible. She started crying, said she'd deleted all, that she was sorry. But I was already done. You can't unring that bell. 14,000 people had already consumed 2 years of my life as entertainment. The damage was permanent. I packed a bag that night and went to stay with a friend. The next day, I consulted a lawyer about privacy violations and potential defamation. The lawyer said I had a case, especially given the photos posted without consent and the monetization aspect. I decided to pursue it, but first I wanted Rachel to experience a fraction of what I'd felt. I sent her blog link to her parents, her siblings, her close friends, and her employer. Let them see what she'd been doing. Let them read her mocking commentary about someone who trusted her. Her mum called her horrified. Her sister sent me an apology. Her employer called her in for a meeting about professional conduct because some of her posts had mentioned work. The followers turned on her when they realized she'd been exploiting someone without consent. Comments that had been supportive became critical. People called her out for the violation. Her follower count started dropping. Sponsors pulled out. The community she'd built around humiliating me collapsed when faced with the reality of what she'd done. Rachel tried calling me dozens of times, left voicemails saying I'd ruined her life, that I'd destroyed something she'd worked hard to build. The irony of that statement was apparently lost on her. She'd built her audience on the ruins of my privacy and trust. The legal process is still ongoing, but my lawyer is optimistic about the privacy violation claims. Rachel's been forced to delete the blog entirely as part of the preliminary agreements. She lost the income, lost the followers, lost the relationship she'd been exploiting for content. As for me, I'm in therapy processing the violation. Learning to trust again feels impossible right now. Every private moment I have with someone, I wonder if they're mentally cataloging it for social media. It's going to take time to heal from knowing that someone I loved saw me as content rather than a person. Monica reached out after everything went public, apologized for not being more direct, said she'd felt conflicted about whether to say anything at all. I told her I appreciated that she tried to warn me, even if her approach was confusing. Turns out she'd been an early follower who'd slowly realized how messed up the whole thing was. Looking back, there were probably signs I missed. Times Rachel was on her phone right after we'd had a deep conversation. The way she'd sometimes repeat things I'd said, like she was testing how they'd sound in writing. But I trusted her, so I didn't question it. The relationship is over. The legal stuff will resolve eventually. But the knowledge that thousands of strangers watched my life unfold without my consent, that's something I'll carry forever. Rachel turned our relationship into a performance, and I never even knew I was on stage. Workplace betrayals hit differently, though, especially when a colleague decides your hard work is actually their ticket to success. I spent 6 months developing a revolutionary inventory system for our company. 6 months of early mornings, late nights, and weekends spent refining algorithms and testing scenarios. This wasn't just some minor process improvement. This was a complete overhaul of how we tracked inventory across 12 warehouses, predicted demand patterns, and automated reordering. The kind of project that could save the company millions annually and actually make a difference in how we operated. I'd kept detailed documentation the entire time. Every iteration, every test result, every modification. I'd scheduled a presentation with upper management for Friday to pitch the final system. This was going to be my big moment. the project that would finally get me noticed for a promotion I'd been chasing for 3 years. Then Wednesday happened. I walked into work and noticed people congratulating Rachel from accounting. She had this huge smile, and our boss Kevin was practically glowing with pride beside her. I asked what was going on, and my desk neighbor told me Rachel had just presented an amazing new inventory system to management. They loved it. They were talking about promoting her to director level. My stomach dropped. I pulled up the company portal and found the presentation recording. Watched Rachel stand in front of the executive team and present my system, my algorithms, my interface designs, my cost-benefit analysis. She'd even used the same examples I developed, the same case studies, the same projected savings down to the exact dollar amount. It was my project, word for word, just coming out of her mouth. I immediately went to Kevin's office, told him there'd been a massive mistake, that Rachel had presented my work. He looked at me with this confused expression and said I must be mistaken. Rachel had been working on this inventory project for months. She'd been giving him regular updates. I said that was impossible because I'd been working on it, that I had all the documentation to prove it. Kevin asked me to send him my files. I did right there from my phone. Every document, every spreadsheet, every piece of code. He said he'd look into it and get back to me. I left his office feeling uneasy but confident that once he saw my documentation, this would all get cleared up. 2 hours later, Kevin called me back to his office. Rachel was there too, looking concerned but not worried. Kevin said he'd reviewed both sets of files, and unfortunately, Rachel's documentation predated mine. She had drafts from 8 months ago. My earliest files were only from 6 months ago. According to the timestamps, she'd started this project first. I just stared at him. That was impossible. I'd started this project 6 months ago from scratch. There was nothing 8 months ago because the project didn't exist yet. I told him the timestamps had to be wrong, that something was off. Rachel jumped in, very sympathetic, saying she understood my confusion. She said she'd actually mentioned the project to me a few months back, and maybe I'd gotten inspired and started working on something similar without realizing I was recreating her work. The audacity of that statement, like I'd somehow accidentally replicated 6 months of complex work that just happened to be identical to hers. But Kevin was nodding along, eating it up. He said these things happened, that parallel development was common, but since Rachel had the earlier documentation, she would be receiving credit for the project. He suggested I focus on my regular duties going forward. I walked out of that office in complete shock. I'd just been robbed in broad daylight, and management was not only okay with it, but actively supporting the thief. That's when I knew something else was going on. Kevin had backed Rachel's story way too quickly, way too completely. He hadn't even questioned the convenient timing of her supposedly older files. He'd just accepted her version and dismissed mine. That night, I started digging. If someone had tampered with file timestamps, there'd be evidence. I checked the metadata on my original files, the ones stored on my personal encrypted backup drive at home. The creation dates were exactly what I remembered, 6 months ago, but the files I'd sent Kevin, the ones on the company server, those had been modified. Someone with admin access had changed the timestamps to make them appear newer than Rachel's fabricated files. Kevin had admin access, so did IT, but they'd have no reason to mess with my files. Kevin, on the other hand, had every reason if he was helping Rachel steal my work. But that wasn't even the worst part. I started looking into Rachel's recent behavior, her relationship with Kevin. I'd never paid much attention before, but now that I was looking, things stood out. The closed-door meetings that went long, the way Kevin always took her side in disputes, how she'd gotten preferential treatment on projects and time-off requests. Then I checked the building security footage, something I had access to because I'd helped implement the new badge system last year. There they were, Rachel and Kevin leaving the office together late at night multiple times over the past year, getting into the same car. The footage from the parking garage showed them kissing before driving off. I found at least 20 instances over the past 14 months. They'd been having an affair, and Kevin had been using his position to advance her career while sabotaging anyone who got in the way, including me. I went back through my project documentation and found something interesting. I'd sent Kevin a preliminary overview of my inventory system idea 4 months ago, just a high-level concept to get approval to pursue it. He'd given me the green light. 2 weeks after that email, Rachel's fake documentation supposedly started. She'd been feeding him information about my project, and he'd been helping her build a false paper trail to steal credit when the time came. The stolen project was just the latest in what I now realize was a pattern. I started talking quietly to other coworkers, people who'd lost out on promotions or had projects mysteriously stall. 3 other people had similar stories, ideas they'd shared with Kevin that somehow became Rachel's wins, a promotion that went to Rachel despite someone else being more qualified. It had been happening for over a year, ever since their affair started. I gathered everything, the original metadata from my encrypted files, the security footage of Rachel and Kevin together, email records showing when I'd first proposed the inventory project, server logs showing when the timestamps on my files had been modified and which admin account had done it, Kevin's. I compiled it all into a detailed report with timestamps, evidence, and a clear timeline of the fraud. Then I went over Kevin's head straight to the VP of Operations, requested a meeting, said it was urgent and involved serious ethics violations. The VP, Margaret, had a reputation for being no-nonsense and fair. She agreed to meet with me that afternoon. I laid it all out, showed her everything, the stolen project, the affair, the pattern of favoritism and fraud, the manipulated file timestamps. She listened without interrupting, her expression getting darker as I went through each piece of evidence. When I finished, she asked me to send her everything and to keep this confidential while she looked into it. That was on a Thursday. By Monday morning, the company had launched a full investigation. HR was involved, legal was involved, internal audit was pulling server logs and reviewing every project Rachel had been credited with over the past year. Margaret had taken this seriously, and suddenly the whole plan fell apart. The investigation moved fast once they started digging. The IT department confirmed that Kevin's admin account had modified my file timestamps. The security footage confirmed the affair, which violated company policy since Kevin was Rachel's direct supervisor. They found emails between Kevin and Rachel discussing my project, including one where he told her exactly how to present it as her own work. He'd literally coached her through stealing my project. They also found financial irregularities. Kevin had approved bonuses and raises for Rachel that were well above what her position and performance justified. He'd been funneling company money to her as part of their relationship. That elevated it from an ethics violation to potential fraud. 2 weeks after my meeting with Margaret, Kevin and Rachel were both fired. The announcement went out company-wide, terminated for ethics violations, fraud, and abuse of position. No severance, no references, just escorted out of the building by security while everyone watched. Margaret called me into her office that same day, apologized personally for what had happened, said the company took full responsibility for not catching this sooner. Then she offered me the director position that had been promised to Rachel, plus back pay for the bonuses I should have received over the past year, plus a formal letter of commendation for my work on the inventory system. The inventory system got implemented exactly as I'd designed it. My name on it, my credit. It's saving the company about $4 million annually, exactly as I'd projected. I got the promotion, the recognition, and the satisfaction of watching 2 people who thought they were untouchable face actual consequences. Rachel tried to get hired at a competitor, but word travels fast in our industry. Kevin's professional reputation is destroyed. Last I heard, he's working in a completely different field because no one in logistics will touch him. The rest of the company learned a valuable lesson about crossing ethical lines. Margaret instituted new policies around conflicts of interest and documentation requirements for projects. My case became the example in the updated ethics training about why integrity matters. I still have all the evidence saved, backed up in multiple locations, not because I think I'll need it, but because I never want to forget how close I came to losing everything I'd worked for, because 2 people thought they were smarter than everyone else. They weren't. They just had power and assumed that was enough. Turned out, having the truth and the evidence mattered more. And if you think one corrupt boss is bad, wait until you hear what happened when this person's manager tried to make them the scapegoat for his own mistakes. When a major client deal fell through, my manager David immediately blamed me in front of executives, claiming I'd mishandled communications and ignored his guidance. We were in the conference room, the kind with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, the kind reserved for meetings where careers get made or destroyed. This was definitely the latter. The client had been worth about $2 million annually. Losing them was a disaster, and David was pointing his finger directly at me. He had this whole presentation prepared, slides showing missed deadlines, failed communications, dropped balls, every single one attributed to me. He told the executives that he'd tried to guide me, that he'd given me clear instructions, but I'd gone rogue and cost us the account. The VP of sales looked at me like I'd personally insulted his family. The CEO asked if I had anything to say for myself. I asked for 24 hours to prepare a response. They granted it, barely. I could tell they'd already made up their minds. David was a 15-year veteran of the company, multiple sales awards, perfect reputation. I was relatively new, only 2 years in. The math wasn't in my favor. I left that conference room knowing I was probably getting fired. David had set this up perfectly. He'd covered his tracks, or so he thought. What he didn't know was that I'd been covering mine too. Every questionable decision David made, every ignored client request, every missed deadline, I documented it all in CYA emails. Cover your ass emails. The kind you send just to have a paper trail. The kind David had acknowledged receiving. I spent that night pulling together every piece of evidence I had. Emails dating back 6 months showing the client's actual requests and David's responses. Meeting notes where David had made promises we couldn't possibly keep. Calendar invites David had declined or ignored. My own emails flagging concerns that David had dismissed. I had recordings too. Our company recorded client calls for quality assurance. I pulled every single one related to this account. The pattern was damning. The client had been clear about their needs from day one. They wanted specific features, specific timelines, specific pricing structures. David had agreed to everything without checking if we could actually deliver. When I'd pointed out that our product didn't have some of the features he'd promised, David told me to figure it out. When I'd said the timeline was impossible, he told me I wasn't being a team player. I'd sent him email after email documenting these concerns. He'd responded to most of them with variations of, "I'll handle it," or "Trust the process." A few he'd ignored completely. None of them showed him actually addressing the problems I'd raised. The client had started getting frustrated around month 4. They'd been promised a demo of features that didn't exist. They'd been given timelines that kept slipping. I'd been the one actually communicating with them, trying to manage expectations while David made more impossible promises. Eventually, they'd had enough and pulled out. That's when David decided I was the perfect scapegoat. I showed up to the formal hearing the next day with a folder 2 inches thick, printed copies of every email, every meeting note, every piece of documentation. I'd organized it chronologically, color-coded by issue type. I'd even created a timeline showing exactly when things went wrong and whose decisions caused each problem. The same executives from yesterday were there. David, too, looking confident. He probably thought I'd show up with excuses and apologies. Instead, I started my presentation. I began with the client's initial requirements email, walked through each request and showed David's response promising we could deliver everything. Then I showed my emails to David questioning whether we actually had those capabilities, showed his responses telling me to make it work, showed the technical documentation proving those features didn't exist in our product. The executives started taking notes. David's confident expression started slipping. Then I moved to the timeline issues. Showed the project plan David had created promising delivery in 3 months. Showed my email pointing out that similar projects had historically taken 6 to 8 months. Showed David's response calling me pessimistic and saying his plan was achievable. Showed the actual timeline of what happened, every missed milestone, every delay. This is where patience finally snapped. I played recordings from client calls, the client asking about features David had promised, me trying to explain the timeline for developing those features, the client getting frustrated because that timeline didn't match what David had told them. You could hear me trying to salvage the relationship while dealing with promises I couldn't possibly keep. Then I showed the emails I'd sent David after each of these calls, flagging the growing client frustration, recommending we have an honest conversation about what we could actually deliver. David's responses were dismissive every single time. He kept saying he had it under control, that I needed to stop worrying and focus on execution. The VP of sales stopped me at one point, asked David directly if he'd actually read these emails. David stammered something about being busy, about trusting his team to handle details. I pulled up the read receipts. He'd opened every single one. I moved to the final month before the client pulled out, showed a particularly damning email where I'd explicitly told David the client was about to walk if we didn't reset expectations. I'd recommended we bring in upper management, have an honest conversation about revised timelines and realistic deliverables. David had responded that bringing in executives would make us look incompetent and to handle it myself. The CEO's face was getting progressively redder. This was looking less like an employee who'd mishandled communications and more like a manager who'd set up his subordinate to fail. But I wasn't done. I showed the timeline of events after the client left, how within hours of them pulling out, David had called this meeting and created his presentation blaming me, how every single accusation in his presentation was contradicted by the documentary evidence, how he deliberately framed the narrative to protect himself. The room was silent when I finished. David tried to defend himself, said I was cherry-picking emails, that there was context I wasn't showing. The CEO asked him to provide that context. David couldn't. Because there wasn't any. The evidence was overwhelming. Then the VP of sales said something that changed everything. She said if David had been covering up mistakes on this account, were there others? She asked for an audit of all of David's active accounts. Things went from bad to unhinged. The audit took a week. Turned out this wasn't an isolated incident. David had been making impossible promises and then blaming team members when things fell apart for years. He was good at managing up, making executives think he was performing miracles, while his actual team struggled with unrealistic expectations and took the fall when things inevitably crashed. They found at least 4 other cases where David had blamed employees for his mistakes. 2 of those employees had been fired. Another had quit. They'd all documented similar patterns of David over-promising and under-delivering, then pointing fingers when reality caught up. The company got quiet about the details, but David was terminated within 2 weeks of my hearing. Escorted out by security, the whole dramatic exit. His 15-year career, all those awards, that perfect reputation, it all collapsed because he'd finally blamed someone who had receipts. I was completely vindicated. The CEO personally apologized for almost terminating me. They offered me a retention bonus and a promotion. 6 months later, when they needed to fill David's position, they offered it to me. I took it. Seemed fitting. The 2 employees who'd been fired because of David's blame games were contacted and offered settlements. The one who'd quit got an apology and a job offer to return if interested. The company implemented new documentation requirements for client communications. Everything had to be logged, every promise had to be verified, every concern had to be recorded. David's legacy was a paper trail requirement he would have hated. I think about that hearing sometimes, how close I came to being fired for someone else's incompetence. How David had probably done this before and gotten away with it because people didn't have proof. He'd built a career on being untouchable, on having a reputation that made his word more valuable than evidence. But reputations only protect you until someone shows up with a 2-inch folder of documentation proving you're lying. The look on his face when I started playing those client call recordings, that moment when he realized I had everything, that his perfect setup was falling apart. I'll remember that forever. Sometimes the corruption goes way deeper than one person, especially when the entire HR department has been covering up misconduct for years. I reported sexual harassment by a senior executive to HR, providing evidence and witness statements. The executive was Michael Chen, VP of Operations, someone who'd been with the company for 12 years and was widely considered untouchable. He'd cornered me in the supply room twice, made explicit comments about my body in front of colleagues, and sent me inappropriate messages through the company chat system. I had screenshots. I had 3 co-workers who'd witnessed his behavior. I had dates, times, specific incidents documented in detail. HR scheduled a meeting within 2 days of my complaint. The director, Patricia, sat across from me with a concerned expression and a notepad. She said all the right things. This was serious. They had a zero-tolerance policy. They'd investigate thoroughly. I'd be protected from retaliation. Standard corporate script delivered with practiced sincerity. I left that meeting feeling heard, maybe even hopeful that something would actually happen. I was naive. Weeks passed with no updates. I followed up twice via email. Patricia responded each time saying the investigation was ongoing and they'd be in touch soon. Meanwhile, I still had to see Michael in meetings, still had to interact with him professionally, while he smirked at me like we shared some private joke. My co-workers who'd agreed to be witnesses started avoiding me, probably scared of being associated with the complaint. Then came the breaking point. 6 weeks after my initial report, I was called into a meeting with Patricia and my department head. They told me the company was restructuring and my position was being moved to a different department. Same role technically, but reporting to a different manager, working on less visible projects, and oh, by the way, the new position paid 15% less. They called it a lateral move. It was a demotion in everything but name. I asked about the investigation. Patricia said it had concluded, and while they couldn't share details due to privacy concerns, appropriate action had been taken. I asked what appropriate action meant. She said she couldn't discuss personnel matters. The meeting ended with paperwork for my transfer that I was expected to sign immediately. I walked out of that office in a daze. 2 days later, I saw the company announcement. Michael Chen had been promoted to Senior Vice President. There was a photo of him shaking hands with the CEO, both of them smiling. The email praised his leadership and dedication to the company's values. They'd buried my complaint. Worse, they'd punished me for making it while rewarding my harasser. The message was crystal clear. Executives were valuable assets to be protected. Employees who complained were problems to be managed. I was furious, but I wasn't stupid. I started documenting everything, kept copies of all my communications with HR, saved the promotion announcement, recorded the timeline of events. Then I filed a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. If the company wouldn't take this seriously, maybe federal investigators would. The EEOC assigned my case to an investigator named Sarah. She was thorough, asking detailed questions about the harassment, the company's response, my subsequent transfer. During one of our conversations, she mentioned something that made my blood run cold. She said based on her preliminary review of the company's records, there appeared to be a pattern of similar complaints that had been resolved through transfers, resignations, or settlements with non-disclosure agreements. I asked how many complaints. She said she couldn't give me exact numbers yet, but it was more than a dozen over the past 5 years, all involving senior-level employees as the accused, none resulting in any disciplinary action against those employees. This wasn't just about me. This was systematic. HR had been running a protection racket for executives, burying complaints and silencing victims to maintain the company's image and keep valuable personnel happy. The company I'd been loyal to for 6 years had built corruption into its operating procedures. I needed to find the other victims. Sarah couldn't give me names due to confidentiality, but she suggested I might want to look at former employees who'd left under unusual circumstances. I started reaching out to people who'd left the company suddenly, especially women who'd worked in departments with senior male leadership. The responses were heartbreaking. Out of 15 people I contacted, 8 had stories nearly identical to mine. Harassment by executives, reports to HR, promises of investigation, then transfers, demotions, or pressure to resign. Several had signed non-disclosure agreements in exchange for severance. They'd been paid to stay quiet about abuse. One woman, Jennifer, had reported her manager for assault, actual physical assault, not just inappropriate comments. HR had investigated for 3 months, during which she was moved to a basement office and excluded from meetings. Eventually, they offered her 6-month salary to resign and sign an NDA. She took it because she couldn't afford to fight, couldn't afford a lawyer, and was having panic attacks every time she entered the building. Her assaulter still worked there as a director. We started comparing notes. The patterns were obvious. HR used the same playbook every time. Express concern, promise investigation, drag it out for weeks, then either transfer the complainant or pressure them to leave. Meanwhile, the accused executives faced 0 consequences. In some cases, they got promoted during or shortly after investigations, like the company was rewarding them for weathering the complaint. Jennifer connected me with 2 other former employees who'd gone through the same thing. We had a group now, 5 women with documented cases of harassment, retaliation, and HR misconduct. We decided to pool our evidence and hire a lawyer together. The lawyer we found, Michelle, specialized in employment discrimination and retaliation cases. She reviewed our collective documentation and said we had one of the strongest cases she'd seen. The pattern of behavior was undeniable. The retaliation was documented. The company's failure to address harassment was systematic. She offered to take the case on contingency, but Michelle suggested something else too. She said we could file lawsuits and go through years of litigation, or we could go public first and force the company's hand, make noise, tell our stories, create pressure that the company couldn't ignore or bury. It was risky, it could affect our cases, but it might also push for faster, more meaningful change. We talked about it for days. Going public meant exposing ourselves, risking professional reputations, dealing with potential backlash. But staying quiet meant the company would keep doing this. Other women would get harassed, other complaints would get buried, the corruption would continue. We decided to go public. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. We launched a coordinated social media campaign. Each of us posted our stories with redacted documents showing the timeline of events. Harassment complaint filed, investigation promised, retaliation received, harasser promoted or protected. We used a hashtag with the company's name and the word accountability. We tagged journalists, employment rights organizations, and advocacy groups. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, our posts had thousands of shares. Former employees started commenting with their own stories. Current employees sent private messages saying they'd witnessed the same patterns. Journalists reached out asking for interviews. The hashtag trended locally, then nationally. The company's PR team went into crisis mode. They issued a statement saying they took all complaints seriously and had robust policies in place. The statement was generic corporate speak that addressed nothing specific. It just made them look worse. People started posting screenshots of the statement alongside our documented evidence, highlighting the contradiction. More victims came forward. The dozen cases I'd heard about from the EEOC investigator turned into over 30 people sharing stories online. The scope of HR's corruption was staggering. They'd been protecting executives and silencing employees for at least 8 years, maybe longer. Federal investigators got involved beyond just the EEOC. The Department of Labor started looking into whether the company had violated employment laws. The SEC started asking questions about whether the company had disclosed these liabilities to shareholders. Local news ran segments, national outlets picked up the story. The company's stock price dropped. 2 weeks after we went public, the entire HR department was placed on administrative leave. The director, Patricia, who'd looked me in the eye and promised a thorough investigation, was escorted out of the building. So was the VP of Human Resources and 3 other senior HR staff. The CEO issued a new statement taking responsibility and promising accountability. It rang hollow given he'd overseen this system for years. A month later, the CEO resigned under pressure from the board. Several executives named in complaints were terminated or quietly resigned. The company hired an outside firm to conduct a comprehensive review of all HR practices. They settled our lawsuit for an undisclosed amount that was honestly more than I'd expected. Jennifer got a settlement too. So did most of the other women who came forward. The company implemented new policies. Third-party hotline for complaints, mandatory training, outside audits. Whether any of it will actually change the culture remains to be seen, but at least the old corrupt system is gone. I left the company as part of my settlement, took the money and found a new job at a competitor that actively recruited me after seeing my story. Turns out being willing to stand up to corruption looks good on a resume in some circles. I'm doing better now, making more money, working somewhere that at least pretends to care about employee welfare. Michael Chen was one of the executives forced to resign. Last I heard, he's struggling to find comparable work because everyone in the industry knows why he left. The stain on his reputation is permanent. There's something satisfying about that, knowing his actions finally caught up with him. I think about the other women sometimes, the ones who took settlements and signed NDAs before we went public. They're still bound by those agreements, still can't tell their stories. Our campaign helped some of them because the company's general misconduct became public knowledge, but they individually can't speak out. That system of silencing victims through legal contracts is still broken. Going public was the right choice. It was terrifying and stressful, and there were moments I regretted it. But watching that corrupt HR department get dismantled, seeing those executives face consequences, knowing we'd stop the pattern from continuing, that made it worth it. Corporate sabotage takes many forms, and sometimes your colleagues aren't just incompetent, they're actively plotting against you. I was the top candidate for department head. 6 years with the company, consistently excellent performance reviews, projects that had saved the department thousands in efficiency improvements. My manager had basically told me the position was mine unless something went catastrophically wrong. I should have known that was tempting fate. The other candidates were decent enough. There was Martin from analytics, Sophia from operations, and Derek from client relations. We'd all worked together for years, grabbed drinks after work sometimes, the usual collegial relationship, or so I thought. About 2 weeks before the final decision, I started noticing weird behavior. The three of them having hushed conversations in the break room that stopped the second I walked in, closed door meetings in empty conference rooms, exchanged glances during team meetings that I couldn't quite read. I told myself I was being paranoid. The promotion had me on edge, making me see conspiracies where there were none. They were probably just stressed about their own candidacies, but the behavior continued and escalated. I'd catch them looking at me during presentations with these strange smirks. Martin would ask me pointed questions about past projects in a way that felt like he was fishing for something specific. Then, 5 days before my final interview with the executive team, I was working late and went to grab something from the printer. The conference room next to the printer area had its door slightly ajar, and I heard my name. I stopped. Eavesdropping isn't my style normally, but something about the tone made me pause. It was Sophia's voice. She was saying something about making sure their stories aligned, that they couldn't have any inconsistencies or it wouldn't work. Martin responded that he'd documented everything, that he had dates and project names ready. Derek laughed and said this was going to destroy my chances completely. They were going to present a formal complaint to HR claiming I'd been systematically taking credit for their work over the past 2 years. I stood there frozen, trying to process what I was hearing. They were planning to sabotage me, not by outworking me or presenting better qualifications, but by lying, by fabricating a harassment complaint and presenting it right before the final decision to tank my candidacy. The audacity is almost impressive in the worst possible way. I left without confronting them, mind racing. If I accused them now without proof, it would look like sour grapes. They'd deny everything, and I look paranoid and unprofessional. I needed evidence. Hard evidence that would prove they were lying and planning this deliberately. I spent that night researching, looked into the legality of recording in our state. It's a one-party consent state, meaning I could legally record conversations I was part of. But I wouldn't be part of their planning sessions. However, I could record in spaces where there's no reasonable expectation of privacy, like conference rooms in the office. The company handbook even mentioned that conference rooms may be monitored for security purposes. The next day, I brought in a small recording device, the kind that looks like a regular phone charger but has a built-in recorder. I plugged it into the outlet in the conference room where I'd overheard them, the one they seemed to favor for their meetings. Then I waited. That afternoon, right on schedule, the three of them booked the room for an hour. I watched from my desk as they filed in with notebooks and closed the door. The recorder was running. I tried to focus on work but couldn't concentrate. Just watched the clock tick by for 60 minutes until they emerged, looking pleased with themselves. After they left for the day, I retrieved the device and listened to the recording at home. What I heard was even worse than I'd expected. They'd spent an hour rehearsing their lies, coordinating a story about how I'd been taking credit for their contributions on multiple projects. Martin had created a whole timeline of fabricated incidents. Sophia had written out specific examples that were creative fiction. Derek kept making jokes about how this was going to destroy my career, how they'd finally knocked me down a peg. The worst part was hearing them laugh about it. This wasn't reluctant sabotage born from desperation. They were enjoying it, getting genuine pleasure from the idea of ruining my reputation and career. Sophia even said something about how satisfying it would be to see my face when the executives confronted me with their allegations. I made backup copies of the recording, sent one to my personal email, saved one to a cloud drive, kept the original file secure. Then I started preparing for my final interview, knowing exactly what was coming. The day arrived. I walked into the executive conference room where the CEO, COO, and VP of HR were waiting along with my direct manager. They asked the standard questions about my vision for the department, my management philosophy, my plans for the first 90 days. I answered confidently because I'd been preparing for this role for years. Then the VP of HR said they'd invited some of my colleagues to provide peer feedback as part of the evaluation process. Martin, Sophia, and Derek walked in. My stomach clenched, but I kept my expression neutral. They sat down across from me, and the VP asked them to share their perspectives on working with me. Martin started, said he had some concerns he felt obligated to raise, that over the past 2 years I'd been taking credit for work that wasn't mine, that I'd presented their ideas as my own in meetings with leadership. Sophia jumped in with specific examples. The same fabricated incidents I'd heard her rehearse on the recording. Derek added that this pattern of behavior made them question my integrity and fitness for a leadership role. The executives looked troubled. My manager looked shocked. This is exactly what they'd planned. Ambush me in the final interview with accusations I couldn't defend against without looking defensive. Brilliant strategy, really, if you're okay with being a terrible person. This is where patience finally snapped. I pulled out my laptop and asked if I could respond to these allegations. The CEO nodded, looking concerned. I opened my audio file and said I'd like to play something first. Then I hit play. Their own voices filled the conference room. Martin talking about fabricating the timeline. Sophia workshopping her fake examples. Derek laughing about destroying my career. All three of them coordinating their lies in detail, congratulating each other on the plan. The color drained from their faces in real time. Martin's mouth actually fell open. Sophia looked like she might be sick. Derek just stared at the laptop like he couldn't believe what was happening. I let about 3 minutes of the recording play, the most damning parts, then paused it. The executives sat in stunned silence. My manager looked furious. The VP of HR was making notes with sharp, angry strokes of her pen. I said calmly that I had the full hour-long recording available if they wanted to hear more, but I thought this excerpt made the situation clear, that these 3 colleagues had fabricated a harassment complaint for the sole purpose of sabotaging my candidacy. That none of their allegations were true, and I was prepared to provide documentation of my actual contributions to every project they'd mentioned. The CEO asked Martin, Sophia, and Derek if they had anything to say. None of them could form words, just sat there looking caught, because they were caught. Completely and irrefutably caught in a conspiracy to destroy a colleague's career through false accusations. The VP of HR asked them to leave the room. They practically ran out. The interview continued without them, but the atmosphere had completely changed. The executives weren't evaluating me anymore. They were apologizing, saying this was unacceptable behavior, that they'd be launching an immediate investigation, that I shouldn't worry about any impact on my candidacy. I got the promotion. Found out 2 days later in a call from the CEO himself, who apologized again for what had happened and assured me the 3 conspirators would face consequences. He wasn't kidding about that part. Martin was fired within the week. The company has zero tolerance for fabricating harassment claims, apparently. It's considered a form of fraud and potential legal liability. Sophia and Derek kept their jobs but were demoted and moved to different departments. The HR investigation found that their plan constituted workplace harassment and a conspiracy to damage my professional reputation. The real kicker? Because I got the promotion to department head, I became Sophia and Derek's new manager before they were transferred out. That first team meeting was supremely awkward. They couldn't even make eye contact with me. I kept it professional, didn't gloat or rub it in, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy watching them squirm a little. Word spread through the office about what happened. The official story was vague, but enough people knew the broad strokes. My reputation actually improved because of how I'd handled it. Didn't stoop to their level, just documented their behavior and let their own words condemn them. Several colleagues reached out to say they respected how I'd managed the situation. The 3 of them are gone from my daily life now. Martin landed somewhere else eventually. Sophia and Derek are in different divisions, and I rarely see them. When I do, they avoid me completely. Which is fine. I have no interest in rebuilding those relationships. You don't come back from something like that. Looking back, I'm almost grateful they were so brazen about their plan. If they'd been more careful, more subtle, I might never have discovered what they were doing until it was too late. Their arrogance and their certainty that they'd get away with it led them to be sloppy, to laugh about it in a conference room where they could be overheard, to rehearse their lies where I could record them. The promotion has been great. I love the work, love the team, feel like I'm finally in a role where I can make real impact. And every time someone tries to play political games or sabotage a colleague, I think about Martin, Sophia, and Derek, and how spectacularly their scheme backfired. Turns out when you give people enough rope, they'll hang themselves. You just have to be patient and document everything. Here's the thing about enemies. Sometimes they're not even people you work with, but neighbors who decide to make your life a living hell. My neighbor Ken started a whisper campaign claiming I was a drug dealer. Not in some vague, subtle way either. He was telling anyone who'd listen that I was running a full-scale operation out of my house, that the people coming and going were customers, that my late-night activities were suspicious, that the community needed to be aware of what was happening right under their noses. The first time the police showed up, I thought it was a mistake. 2 officers knocked on my door at 7 in the morning, asking if they could come in and look around. I was confused but cooperative. Let them search the whole place. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. I work from home as a software developer. The most illegal thing in my house was probably some downloaded music from college. The officers apologized for the inconvenience, said they'd received a complaint from a concerned neighbor. I asked who. They couldn't tell me, but I had a pretty good idea. Ken lived 3 houses down and had been giving me weird looks for months. I chalked it up to him being antisocial. Apparently it was more than that. The police visits continued, once a month at first, then more frequently. Each time, a concerned citizen had reported suspicious activity at my address. Each time, the police found nothing. But the damage was done. Neighbors started avoiding me. People who used to wave stopped making eye contact. I heard whispers at the neighborhood block party. Saw people literally cross the street when they saw me coming. My reputation in the community was completely destroyed, and I had no idea why Ken had targeted me. We'd barely interacted. I'd been polite the few times we'd spoken. Helped him carry groceries once when I saw him struggling. There was no obvious conflict, no reason for this level of hostility. Then I started noticing the traffic to his house. It was subtle at first. Cars pulling up at odd hours, people going in and out quickly. Ken's place was busy, way busier than a normal residential home should be, and the pattern was weird. Most visitors came late evening or after midnight. They'd park on the street, go inside for 20 to 30 minutes, then leave. Sometimes 5 or 6 different cars in a single night. I installed security cameras, told myself it was for protection given all the police attention, but really, I wanted to know what Ken was up to. If he was spreading lies about me, maybe there was a reason. Maybe he was projecting. The footage over the next few weeks was revealing. Ken had a steady stream of visitors every single night. I started documenting license plates, timestamps, patterns. The same cars came back multiple times. Some people showed up weekly like clockwork. Others were more sporadic. But the volume was undeniable. Something was going on in that house. I also noticed deliveries. Unmarked vans pulling up during the day while Ken was supposedly at work. People unloading boxes and carrying them into his garage. This wasn't Amazon. These were professional moving operations happening in broad daylight. One night I heard shouting from his place, loud enough that I could make out some of it. Someone was angry about money, about being cheated. Ken's voice was trying to calm them down. Then it got quiet, too quiet. The visitor left looking furious. That's when I realized Ken wasn't just antisocial. He was running something illegal and using me as cover. By painting me as the neighborhood criminal, he positioned himself as the concerned citizen, the guy who was looking out for everyone. Meanwhile, he was operating whatever scheme he had going, completely under the radar because all suspicion was pointed at me. And here's where it gets absurd. I started going through my security footage more carefully, documenting everything. Times, dates, license plates, descriptions of people and vehicles. I noticed one van that came by every other week. Same time, same day. I managed to catch the company name on the side. Looked it up. The van had been reported stolen 6 months ago. Ken was dealing in stolen goods. The deliveries I'd been seeing were hot merchandise being dropped off. And the nighttime visitors? I did some research on a few of the license plates. Several belonged to people with gambling-related arrests on their records. Ken was running an illegal gambling operation out of his basement. This guy had been calling me a drug dealer while simultaneously running a stolen goods fence and underground casino. The projection was almost impressive in its audacity. I compiled months of footage, organized it by activity type, made a detailed timeline with license plate numbers, vehicle descriptions, and patterns. Then I took it to the police, not the regular officers who'd been showing up at my place, but directly to a detective I found who specialized in organized crime. The detective looked through everything I'd brought, asked questions about how long this had been going on, whether I'd noticed any specific patterns. I told him about the gambling visitors, the stolen van, the whole operation. He said they'd look into it. 2 weeks later, Ken's house got raided. I watched from my window as a dozen police vehicles surrounded the place. Officers in tactical gear went in. Ken was brought out in handcuffs, looking absolutely stunned. Then came the trucks. They hauled out box after box of merchandise, electronics, jewelry, tools, all kinds of stolen goods. They dismantled his basement and found a full gambling setup. Poker tables, slot machines, the works. The final count was over $200,000 in stolen merchandise and illegal gambling equipment. Ken had been running a major operation for at least 2 years. The police had been completely unaware because Ken had successfully deflected all attention onto me with his lies. Things went from bad to unhinged during the investigation. It turned out Ken's whisper campaign was even more calculated than I'd realized. He'd been filing the police reports himself, claiming to witness my supposed drug deals. He'd convinced other neighbors to report suspicious activity at my house, coaching them on what to say. He'd built an entire false narrative around me being a criminal specifically to establish himself as a trustworthy, concerned citizen. One of my neighbors came forward during the investigation and admitted Ken had approached her months ago, told her he was worried about drug activity in the neighborhood, and asked her to keep an eye on my place. Suggested she call police if she saw anything unusual. She'd made 2 of the reports about me based on completely normal activities, like having friends over or getting a late-night food delivery. Ken had weaponized the community against me to create cover for his own criminal enterprise, and it had worked perfectly until I'd started documenting his actual illegal activities. The prosecution's case against Ken was airtight. They had my footage, the stolen goods, the gambling equipment, witness testimony from people he'd scammed, and financial records showing hundreds of thousands of dollars in illegal transactions. He pleaded guilty to avoid trial, probably because fighting it would have been pointless. Ken got 5 years in prison. The judge specifically mentioned his manipulation of the community and false reports against me as aggravating factors during sentencing. Said that kind of calculated deception to cover criminal activity deserved a harsher penalty. After Ken's arrest, my neighbors started apologizing. Some in person, some with cards or baked goods, all deeply embarrassed that they'd believed his lies. The ones who'd actively participated in reporting me felt especially guilty. I accepted the apologies but kept most people at arm's length. It's hard to forget that these same people had been perfectly willing to ostracize me based on one person's word. My reputation was eventually restored. The local newspaper ran a story about the bust and mentioned that Ken had falsely accused a neighbor to deflect suspicion. People who'd avoided me started being friendly again. The police formally apologized for the repeated searches, and the lieutenant sent a letter acknowledging that I'd been wrongly targeted. But the experience changed how I viewed the neighborhood. I kept the security cameras up, still document unusual activity, not out of paranoia, but because I learned that sometimes the person pointing fingers the loudest is doing it to hide their own dirt. Ken taught me that trust has to be earned, and communities can turn on you faster than you'd think when someone spins the right narrative. Ken's house eventually sold. New family moved in, nice people who had no idea about the history. I was polite but distant. The whole thing left me pretty cynical about neighborhood relationships and quick judgments. The irony is that if Ken had just minded his own business, he might have run his illegal operation indefinitely. Instead, he got paranoid, decided to create a scapegoat, and ended up drawing the exact attention he was trying to avoid. His own scheme destroyed him. At least neighbors are basically strangers, but the ultimate betrayal is when the people who know you best, your own friend group, decide to turn against you. My 8-person friend group suddenly iced me out without explanation. One day, everything was normal. The next day, I was a ghost. Group chats that had been active every single day went completely silent the moment I posted anything. Plans I'd normally be included in happened without me. I'd see photos on social media of everyone hanging out, doing the same things we'd always done together, just without me there. At first, I thought maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe everyone was just busy. But then I noticed new group chats being created, ones I wasn't added to. I could see the notification counts changing on people's phones when we were together. They were talking, just not to me, not including me. I tried asking what was going on, sent individual messages to people I'd been close with for years, got vague responses about being busy, about nothing being wrong, about me overthinking things. But the freeze out continued. Invitations to weekly dinners stopped coming. Game nights happened without me. Someone's birthday party that I would normally help plan, I found out about through Instagram after it already happened. It hurt in a way that's hard to describe. These were people I'd known for years. We'd been through breakups together, job losses, family drama. We'd taken trips together. We'd been in each other's weddings, and suddenly I was just cut out like I'd never mattered at all. After 3 weeks of this, I ran into Maya at the grocery store. She looked uncomfortable seeing me, tried to make an excuse to leave quickly. I stopped her and asked point blank what was going on. Why was everyone avoiding me? She hesitated, then said that people were hurt by what I'd been saying about them, that I'd been talking behind their backs. I was completely blindsided. I asked what she meant. What had I supposedly said? She mentioned specific things, cruel observations about people's relationships, their jobs, their appearances. Things I would never say because I didn't think them. She said Lauren had told everyone, that Lauren had been confiding in people one by one about how I'd been trash-talking the whole group. Lauren, my supposed best friend of 6 years, the person I talked to almost every day, she'd been telling everyone I was bad-mouthing them behind their backs, and they'd all believed her without ever asking me about it. I told Maya none of it was true, that I'd never said any of those things. She looked uncertain, said that Lauren had been pretty specific, had details that made it seem real. I asked her to tell me exactly what Lauren had claimed I said. As she listed things off, I realized some of them referenced conversations or events I hadn't even been present for. I couldn't have made observations about things I didn't witness. I went home and started going through my message history with Lauren. Months of conversations. I was looking for any hint of what she'd been planning, any clue about why she'd do this. That's when I noticed something. Around the time the freeze out started, I'd started dating someone new. James. I'd been happy, really happy for the first time in a while. I'd been talking to Lauren about him constantly, and Lauren had been weird about it. Not overtly negative, but little comments here and there. Observations about how I was changing, how I wasn't making as much time for friends. I'd brushed it off at the time, but looking back, she'd been planting seeds. Then I found a deleted message. I have this app that recovers recently deleted text, something I'd installed once when I accidentally deleted something important. In the recovery folder was a message from Lauren to me that she'd sent and then deleted within seconds. It said, "You don't deserve to be this happy while the rest of us are struggling." She'd been jealous, jealous of my new relationship, of my happiness, and instead of being a friend, she decided to isolate me from everyone we both cared about. But that wasn't even the worst part. I went full detective mode, started cross-referencing the things Maya said Lauren had claimed with actual timelines and conversations. Lauren had told people I'd made fun of Tyler's job situation at a dinner I didn't attend. She'd said I'd called Jessica's boyfriend controlling during a conversation that never happened. She'd attributed quotes to me from events I had proof I wasn't at, messages sent while I was provably somewhere else. Her stories were full of inconsistencies, but nobody had thought to check because why would they doubt Lauren? She'd been part of the group just as long as I had. She had no apparent reason to lie. Except she did. Jealousy and spite were apparently reason enough. I started documenting everything, every inconsistency in Lauren's story, every timeline issue, every impossible claim. I also started looking through shared cloud storage, old group photos, anything that might give me more information. That's when I found Lauren's accidentally shared photo backup. She'd shared access to her cloud storage with the group months ago, so we could all upload photos from a trip we'd taken. She'd apparently forgotten to revoke access. Her automatic photo backup was still running, including screenshots of her private messages. I probably shouldn't have looked, invasion of privacy and all that, but she'd systematically destroyed my friendships with lies, so I didn't feel particularly bound by normal ethical constraints at that point. What I found was damning. Screenshots of Lauren's conversations with other people, not in our friend group. Messages where she talked about how annoying Tyler was, how she couldn't stand Jessica's constant relationship drama, how Maya was boring and predictable. She'd been trash-talking everyone while simultaneously telling them I was the one doing it. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. There were also messages about me and James, how it wasn't fair that I'd found someone, how she'd been single for 2 years and I didn't deserve to be happy when she was miserable, how she was going to make sure I ended up alone like I deserved. She'd literally planned this, mapped out how she'd turn everyone against me. I compiled everything into a presentation, screenshots, timelines, inconsistencies in her stories, and her own cruel messages about each person in the group. Then I did something I'd never done before. I requested a formal group meeting, told everyone it was important, that I had something to show them about what had been happening. Most of them showed up, probably out of curiosity more than anything. Lauren came too, looking nervous but trying to play it cool. We met at Tyler's apartment, everyone sitting around looking uncomfortable. I could feel the hostility directed at me. They thought they were there to confront me about my supposed betrayal. Instead, I opened my laptop and started presenting. I began with the timeline of Lauren's claims, showed how she'd told different people, different versions of what I'd supposedly said, highlighted the inconsistencies, pointed out conversations I couldn't have been part of because I wasn't there, provided receipts showing I was somewhere else when these supposed trash-talking sessions occurred. People started looking uncertain. Lauren tried to interrupt, said I was manipulating the facts. I kept going. Then I showed Lauren's own messages, her real thoughts about each person in that room, calling Tyler's job situation pathetic, calling Jessica desperate for staying with her boyfriend, calling Maya boring, calling everyone in the group fake friends she only tolerated out of convenience. The room went dead silent. Everyone was staring at Lauren. She'd gone pale, stammering that the screenshots were fake, that I'd made them up. I showed the metadata, the timestamps, the file properties proving they came from her device, showed the cloud storage access logs proving these were her actual backups. Then came the breaking point. I showed the messages about me and James, about how she'd planned to isolate me because she was jealous, how she'd deliberately set out to destroy my friendships because she couldn't stand seeing me happy. Her own words condemning her more effectively than anything I could say. The group turned on Lauren immediately. People started yelling, Jessica was crying, Tyler looked like he wanted to throw something. Maya just kept shaking her head in disbelief. Lauren tried to defend herself, but there was no defense. She'd been caught completely. She ended up leaving in tears, but nobody followed her. Nobody comforted her. They were too busy processing that they'd been manipulated for weeks, that they'd cut out a real friend based on lies from someone who actually hated them all. The apologies started that night. Long messages from everyone expressing regret for believing Lauren without talking to me first, for letting themselves be turned against me so easily. Some of the apologies felt genuine. Others felt more like people covering themselves for being wrong. I accepted them all, but with reservations. Lauren was immediately removed from all group chats, blocked by most people. The few who didn't block her initially did so within days after she tried to claim she'd been misunderstood or that I'd somehow manipulated the evidence. Nobody was buying it anymore. Some of the friendships were salvageable. Maya and I talked for hours, worked through what happened, rebuilt trust slowly. Tyler apologized and proved he meant it by actually putting in effort to repair things. Jessica took longer, but eventually we found our way back to being close. Others weren't salvageable. Some people I realized had been too quick to believe the worst about me, too willing to cut me off without even asking my side. That told me something about the depth of those friendships. I let them go without fighting for them. The friend group itself never fully recovered. We tried having gatherings like before, but the dynamic was broken. Too much had happened. Eventually, we all kind of drifted into smaller groups, closer friendships based on who'd actually proven themselves during the crisis. Lauren completely lost everyone. Last I heard, she'd moved to a different city. Couldn't handle running into people who knew what she'd done. Her reputation in our social circle was destroyed. People talked. The story spread. She'd built her isolation of me on lies and ended up isolated herself by truth. I learned a lot from that experience, about keeping receipts, about not taking friendships for granted, about how easily people can be manipulated if someone is willing to lie consistently enough. I'm more careful now about who I trust, more diligent about documentation, more aware of red flags in relationships. Looking back, there were signs I missed. Lauren's subtle negativity, her comments about my relationship, her need to always be the center of attention. But I'd trusted her, considered her one of my closest friends. That trust made me blind to what she was really doing. At least the truth came out. At least I wasn't left wondering what I'd done wrong, or spending years thinking I'd somehow deserve to lose all my friends. The truth, backed up by evidence, was the most powerful weapon I had. Lauren had counting on people believing her over me. She hadn't counted on me having proof. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you've witnessed 15 stories of revenge, justice, and people who refuse to be victims. Remember, keeping receipts isn't paranoia, it's protection. Sometimes the truth is the most powerful weapon you have. Sweet dreams, everyone, and remember, document everything, trust your instincts, and never underestimate the power of a well-timed screenshot. I'll see you in the next video with more stories that prove reality is stranger than fiction. Until then, stay safe out there, and maybe check those joint bank accounts one more time.